Chapter 131, Fair Fight. Perhaps because the corpse manipulation lineage used to be a service industry, Elder Lin did not put on airs. When Jiang Li chatted with him, they actually got along quite well. They had all played with zombies and ghosts before, and what they practiced were all yin attribute cultivation methods. Although there was a huge difference in age, they also felt like they regretted not meeting sooner. As he spoke, Jiang Li followed Elder Lin back to his residence. There were more than 100 coffins filled with talismans and more than 1,000 soul altars that were lit with joss sticks. This was the daily routine of the corpse manipulators. They were always accompanied by evil spirits and ghosts. Although Jiang Li did not dislike it, he did not like the atmosphere here either. Now, he was a little glad that he had chosen to become Elder He's disciple. After learning from each other for a long time, Jiang Li finally returned to the demon vanquishing hall with the few items that the other party had given him. The ghost wood art was a tree demon's cultivation method. It was not like the cultivation methods passed down by human cultivators over generations. Some people continuously developed and studied cultivation methods. The ghost wood art did not have a set of spell techniques, so Jiang Li's wood attribute spell techniques were all from the corpse manipulation lineage. Apart from studying array formations, he received quite a bit of help in terms of spell techniques during his meeting with Elder Lin. After reading the ancient books given to him by Elder Lin overnight, Jiang Li threw the heavy task to the parallel mind of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements peak that was far away. His main body stepped on the time and walked up to the battle arena A. The other party was already waiting for Jiang Li in the arena this time. Jiang Li went forward and was speechless to discover that it was actually a disciple of the demon vanquishing hall. That senior brother had clearly long known that his opponent today would be Jiang Li, and his face was showing a helpless and bitter smile. Jiang Li also felt a little awkward and greeted the other party. "Junior brother Jiang Li, you have to be gentler this time." That disciple bitterly said so, causing the audience to sigh again. The gong sounded. The senior sister from the Rejuvenation Hall was already preparing for the next battle. In her experience, this was another battle that would be ended in seconds. The senior brother opposite him immediately assumed a defensive posture and erected a shield artifact in front of him. He closed his eyes and waited for the terrifying impact to arrive. However, Jiang Li did not attack as he usually did. "Senior brother, we're all fellow disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall. It wouldn't be good if we got injured in an intense battle. Why don't we change our method of fighting?" When the disciple saw that Jiang Li's attack had yet to arrive, he removed his shield and looked at Jiang Li. "Change the method, how?" Jiang Li thought for a moment before suggesting a suggestion that was rather disadvantageous to him. "I'll defend and senior brother will attack. If senior brother can beat me out of the ring within 100 moves, it'll be my loss. If senior brother is unable to make me fall out of the arena within 100 moves, then you will admit defeat. How about it?" When the disciple from the Demon Vanquishing Hall heard that there was such a good deal, he immediately wanted to agree. He did not have any strange thoughts like being humiliated by his junior brother. What he felt was that even if he lost in the end, at least he would not be beaten up, right? "Junior brother Jiang Li, doing this is against the rules, right?" The disciple of the Rejuvenation Hall, who was the referee, felt a little hesitant. This was because the essence of the arena battle was to choose the best disciples to participate in the Great Mountain Cultivator Tournament and compete for more distributional rights in the Medicine Garden Mystic realm. At this time, if the outstanding disciples took the initiative to restrict their strength in order to form a fair competition with the weak disciples, it was undoubtedly stupid. If the outstanding disciples lost, it might affect the sect's interests. Therefore, as a temporary referee, she was a little hesitant about stopping Jiang Li's antics. "Senior sister, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Senior brother, please take out your artifact." That disciple scratched his head in slight embarrassment. Jiang Li was going to take hits from him now. He had already been given such good treatment, so was it not a little too overboard for him to still use an artifact? However, under Jiang Li's persistence, he still took out his main combat artifact, a shiny silver three-section staff. Jiang Li's consideration was that if his opponent did not use any artifact, he might not even need to activate the Overlord body art. If the opponent could not injure him, then what meaning was there in doing this? The other party took out the three-section staff, and Jiang Li also started to remove his clothes in the arena. He threw the white disciple uniform to his side, revealing a healthy and strong muscular body. Come! Jiang Li set up the standard movements of the Overlord body art. Then, the strength in his entire body began to slowly contract, fusing with the spiritual qi that was gradually released and dispersed as evenly as possible to his limbs and bones. The air whistled from the right, and a sharp, air-piercing sound could be heard. It was the senior brother's three-section staff. Slam! There was no loud sound. The end of the three-section staff really hit Jiang Li's shoulder. However, under the collision of the huge force, the sound produced was probably that of an ordinary mortal using their index and middle fingers to knock on the table. Jiang Li did not use his armament-hard skin to defend himself, but he still did not feel any pain. When the three-section staff collided with his skin, a force that had been constricted by Jiang Li's body was released at the right time, and it perfectly offset the force of the attack. The difference in strength was very small, so even the sound of collision was very soft. At the beginning, that disciple from the demon vanquishing hall had been restraining himself. Although he had used a lot of strength, the area that he had struck was the shoulder. It was not a vital area. After he noticed that Jiang Li was fine, he felt much more at ease. The three-section staff in his hand waved even faster. In the next moment, a violent storm of attacks assaulted Jiang Li. A series of dense cracking sounds rang out. Jiang Li's incomplete Overlord body art quickly revealed a flaw. The distribution was uneven. The combination of spiritual qi and body strength was not dense. The subsequent replenishment was insufficient, etc. At first there was no reaction, but gradually there were white marks from time to time. Jiang Li calculated. With his current Overlord body, he would probably make a mistake every 3 attacks and fail to defend himself. This success rate was already considered excellent for a beginner like Jiang Li. However, he still did not have much idea on how to maintain the Overlord state while moving. He still needed to attempt more trial and error. Jiang Li silently remembered the reason for his mistakes and corrected them bit by bit. It was only when the disciples opposite him stopped attacking, while gasping for breath, that Jiang Li finally woke up from his concentrated state. He had gained a lot from this battle. After both sides cupped their hands, Jiang Li won the 3rd round of the battle. When he looked at the white marks on his body, the small bruises had already disappeared under the powerful recovery and enhancement effect of his various buffs. Chapter 132, Lightning Technique. After the 3rd round of the martial competition, only 34 Qi Refinement Realm disciples remained. These 34 people could already be considered elites among the young disciples. Basically, everyone had tricks up their sleeves, and not many of them were really weak. The following competition would only be even more intense, and Jiang Li's next opponent would be that lightning attribute disciple. Jiang Li glanced at the other party and noticed that he was looking at him as well. A strand of lightning flickered on the other party's palm, and then he made a gesture to Jiang Li as if he was certain that Jiang Li would be defeated. Lightning was an extreme yang attribute, so it was very effective against evil things in the world. Not to mention ghosts and zombies. Even ordinary ghostwood trees in the natural world would often be killed by lightning due to the characteristics of gathering yin qi. Jiang Li, who had the wood yin attribute, cultivated the ghost wood art. In the laws of the cultivation world, it was roughly to the extent where he was twice as weak to lightning. At that time, Jiang Li still remembered the incident in Cloud Stream City where he was nearly struck to death by the tribulation lightning. He did not know how powerful that person's lightning was. Jiang Li was slightly concerned about this, but he was not too worried. If the other party was at the Foundation establishment realm, Jiang Li might be a little troubled. However, if he was only at the Qi refinement realm, even if this was a natural enemy, it would be very difficult to pose a substantial threat to him. After leaving the venue, Elder He held a celebration party in the Demon Vanquishing Hall. This was because, up until now, regardless of whether it was the Qi refinement realm or the Foundation establishment realm, the number of disciples in the Demon Vanquishing Hall was the largest. Especially in the Qi refinement realm arena, 8 of the 34 people were from the Demon Vanquishing Hall. This number could be said to be outstanding among the halls. This also allowed Elder He to feel proud in front of the elders in the long, clear hall. However, Elder He also knew that once the next round passed, this number would probably plummet. After all, the disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall were experienced in combat because they carried out missions to subdue demons all year round. They were skilled in using their Tao techniques, so they were slightly stronger than the disciples of the other halls. They had given their blood and sweat to achieve this. The advantage was that their average strength was higher than the rest. However, the cultivation world was not a place where hard work could change everything. Talent, resources, and artifacts were far more important than hard work. Although it sounded cruel, this was the truth. When the disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall faced other ordinary disciples, they naturally held the advantage without any reason. But as the martial arts competition progressed, the remaining people were all elites, the treasures of the other halls. In comparison, the resources and treatment that ordinary inner sect disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall could receive was definitely inferior to theirs. Therefore, Elder He did not ask for too much from them. He very happily set the celebration party to today to let everyone enjoy in advance. He would leave the rest to the geniuses. In any case, the Demon Vanquishing Hall was definitely going to take the first place in the Qi refinement realm. Regarding this, Elder He spoke kindly to Jiang Li, saying that if he did not obtain first place, Elder He would personally come and treat his broken leg. As for why Jiang Li would have a broken leg, Elder He only left a mysterious smile. The celebratory banquet ended very late and was very fulfilling. When Jiang Li returned to his small courtyard, he was in a drunken state. It was just that the few of them had relatively faster metabolism. Otherwise, wouldn't this affect the battle the next day? After Jiang Li skillfully activated the array formation, he pressed the status for 5 seconds and his drunken state was removed. His slightly dizzy mind instantly became clear. After entering the chamber, he sat down cross-legged and connected to the parallel mind of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak. Then pieces of text appeared in his mind without any obstruction. That was what he had learned from the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak. One of them was a wood attribute sword cultivation method that he had spent a lot of effort to obtain from that junior brother of his from the wood element peak. Jiang Li did not have a sword heart, so it was naturally impossible for him to change his cultivation method. However, the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak originated from the ancient Shu Mountain Immortal Sect. Some of the individual chapters in their cultivation methods and some of the secret techniques of Shu Mountain were still worth studying for Jiang Li. However, the Shu Mountain sword technique was honest and peaceful. It was very rare to have sacrificial techniques. This made Jiang Li somewhat disappointed. After handing a few more missions to his parallel mind, Jiang Li had a rare nap. In his sleep, his consciousness seemed to have turned into a ghost again, floating around the courtyard and playing the treasure hunt game. The next morning, Jiang Li and his senior brothers arrived at the venue. He leaped onto the stage skillfully. There were many more ravines on the stage. It seemed that the battle situation these few days was quite intense. Demon Vanquishing Hall, Jiang Li. Senior brother, please enlighten me. Jiang Li stood on the stage and remained polite. Foreign Affairs Hall, my name is Ma Dongui. I don't dare to enlighten you. Senior brother, I'll apologize to you in advance. That disciple with the lightning attribute spiritual root had dark and rough skin. When he smiled, he opened his mouth wide, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. At a glance, he looked like an honest farmer. However, the lightning flashes in his hands from time to time still showed how extraordinary he was. "Senior brother, why do you say that?" Jiang Li gave him face and replied. "I've seen your battle. Junior brother Jiang Li, you're indeed very strong. If you didn't encounter me, you would definitely be able to smoothly enter the next round of the martial arts competition. That's why I have to apologize to you in advance." This senior brother might look very honest and spoke politely, but he was really good at posturing. "I see. Senior brother doesn't need to worry too much about this. The next round of the martial competition is a ranking challenge. If senior brother loses today, there's still a chance for the next round." Jiang Li comforted his opponent like this, indicating that he would definitely lose. There was no harm in shooting their mouths off. The senior sister of the rejuvenation hall who was standing at the side had already heard so much these days that she was already numb to it. The gong sounded, and the battle officially began. 5 Heart Lightning. That lightning spiritual root cultivator, Ma Dongui, was really sinister. He had already formed a hand seal at some point in time. With a knock of the gong, he raised his hand and shot a bolt of lightning at Jiang Li. Clap, 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 clap. The 5 heart lightning was released from his 5 fingers, and it struck wherever he pointed. 5 bolts of lightning instantly struck where Jiang Li was standing, and it instantly caused a burnt smell to arise. Moreover, the ground on the combat arena that had been reinforced by the talisman formation had been blasted into 5 pieces. However, the lightning bolt's target was no longer there. 10 meters away, Jiang Li stood loosely. He waved at Ma Dongui, gesturing for him to continue. The speed of lightning was extremely fast. If Jiang Li wanted to dodge when the lightning technique had been activated, it would be extremely difficult. However, no matter how fast the lightning was, the reaction speed of the person controlling it was limited. Relying on the power of his lightning attribute spell techniques, Ma Dongui had always focused on frontal assaults to take down his opponents. His previous opponents were only average in strength, and they were always directly taken away by his lightning techniques. As a result, this guy's actual combat experience was ridiculously poor. He stood there like a statue while chanting incantations, and the thought of attacking was completely written on his face. This allowed Jiang Li to predict his movements extremely easily. Lightning flashed repeatedly on the arena, but Jiang Li's figure was like a phantom as he appeared and disappeared on the arena. He was always able to perfectly dodge his opponent's lightning strikes, and he seemed to be very relaxed. Jiang Li even flashed to Ma Donggui's side and patted his back, almost scaring him out of his wits. However, for some reason, Jiang Li did not directly knock down his opponent. Instead, he casually dodged as if he was playing a game. "Do you only know how to dodge?" A few minutes later, Ma Dongui was already covered in cold sweat and gasping for breath, while Jiang Li was still standing perfectly fine. Not even the corner of his clothes had been scratched. It seemed that the advantage of the lightning attribute spiritual root was that it was fast, but its weakness was also that it was fast. Was he about to collapse after such a short period of time? Therefore, female cultivators had to be careful. They definitely could not find such a partner. However, since he said so, Jiang Li did not dodge anymore. This was an opportunity to test how powerful this mutated spiritual root was. In addition, Jiang Li also had a little thought. Lightning could refine the body. This was practically the consensus of all transmigrators. He also wanted to try it. Would this lightning attribute spell technique have the same effect? Jiang Li no longer dodged. After circulating the overlord body art, he stood on the spot and waited for the lightning technique to descend. Clap, 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 clap. When the senior brother with the lightning spiritual root saw that Jiang Li had actually stopped, he was immediately overjoyed in his heart. In the next moment, another 5 bolts of lightning flashed past and directly struck Jiang Li. White smoke rose in spirals. 5 areas of the white disciple uniform on Jiang Li's body were scorched black. It looked like the power was really not small. It actually hurt quite a bit. After enduring 5 bolts of lightning, Jiang Li silently felt the feeling of being electrocuted. As expected of the lightning technique, its penetrating power was without question. Physical defense was useless against lightning. After all, whether or not he channeled electricity had nothing to do with his physical toughness. If he wanted to defend against lightning, he could only use spiritual qi. On the other hand, Jiang Li's Wuyin spiritual qi was countered by his opponent. It required him to expend several times the energy in order to resist and wear down the 5 bolts of lightning formed by spiritual qi. This already greatly reduced Jiang Li's defense against lightning. Coupled with the fact that Jiang Li's overlord body art had yet to mature, the 5 bolts of lightning that struck Jiang Li were not completely blocked. A portion of them still seeped into Jiang Li's body. Jiang Li only felt that wherever the electric currents passed, it was numbing. Under the stimulation of the electric currents, his muscles were slightly injured and twitching. A status called mild lightning popped up on the interface at the right time. This bit of intense electric current only slowed Jiang Li's body by about 3%. However, due to his extremely powerful physique, this bit of electric current could not cause him any more injuries, nor could it strengthen him in the slightest. Could it be that the intensity was not enough? Jiang Li was unwilling to give up on the effects of lightning. He reduced the power of the overlord body art and allowed more lightning energy to flow into his body. However, other than the slowing effect becoming stronger, there was still no strengthening effect. Jiang Li frowned and was slightly disappointed by this. However, it made sense. If it was so easy to train the body with lightning, why did this Ma Dongui not train his own body? If the user could not use his lightning to train his own body, it was even more impossible for the enemy to do so. What kind of talent would invent a spell that could make the enemy stronger? After that, Jiang Li didn't want to continue wasting time with him, and he casually formed a seal before activating the arrangement he set up earlier. Accompanied by a loud explosion, a flame suddenly swelled from behind the lightning spiritual root disciple, Ma Dongui, and he was ruthlessly sent flying. The sudden explosion caused him to be utterly unprepared, and he flew to a place not far from Jiang Li. The clothes on his back was completely burnt, and he lay on the ground unable to stand up again. It turned out that when Jiang Li approached the other party earlier, he had patted the other party on the back and placed a talisman on Ma Dongui's back. Jiang Li had always been a cautious person. He would basically not do anything that he was not confident in. After all, his spiritual root attribute was countered by lightning. Even if he wanted to use his body to test the lightning, in the event he was unlucky and lost, Elder he would not let him off. Therefore, to be safe, Jiang Li pasted a talisman paper on the back of the other party. That way, even if he was controlled by the lightning technique, he could directly detonate the talisman to win the battle. Earlier, there were many disciples in the surroundings who had seen Jiang Li's little actions behind the other party. However, Ma Dongui clearly did not notice the changes in the audience's gaze. Perhaps when he woke up, he would not know how he had lost. Chapter 133, Green Elegance. Battle Arena A, the winner, is the Demon Vanquishing Hall's disciple, Jiang Li. In the 4th round of fights, he still won without any accidents. After 4 rounds of elimination, there were still 17 Qi Refinement Realm disciples left. In the next round, it was not to continue with the one-on-one competition like before. Instead, it was the ranking that Jiang Li had mentioned earlier. In order to prevent the large sects from crushing the small sects too severely, there were some restrictions on the number of people participating in the Great Mountain Cultivator competition. Each sect could at most send out 15 disciples to participate. Among them, 10 were Qi Refinement Realm disciples, and 5 were Foundation Establishment Realm disciples. This way, even if the disciples of the 4 great sects were really too strong in the end, and directly dominated the competition. According to the distribution rules that they had agreed on at that time, there was still 20–30% left over for the other dozens of sects to distribute. This was also a compromise the four great sects made to placate the other sects. This was because the history of the scripture storage valley was still vivid in their minds. Even rogue cultivators could form a large sect with their combined efforts, much less those sects that were not considered weak to begin with. If they joined forces, even the four great sects would not be able to suppress them. Therefore, they had to give up this portion of the benefits and let them compete with each other. In order to obtain the greatest benefits under the rules, the sect had to choose the strongest 10 Qi refinement realm cultivators. Therefore, the final round would be carried out in an arena defending style. The 1st to 10th position would be represented in these 10 rings. 10 disciples would go up to defend the ring on their own. The other disciples would challenge either of them, and the winner continued to stay behind to defend the ring against the next challenger. The last 10 disciples standing were the top 10 in this sect competition. Of course, before that, Jiang Li and the others would have 3 days of rest and adjustment. In these 3 days, all the other defeated disciples would obtain a chance to participate in the revival round. The name list for the previous 4 rounds of martial competition had been meticulously arranged by the sect. They would do their best to prevent the outstanding disciples from colliding too early. But in many cases, even high-level cultivators could not calculate everything. For example, Jiang Li, a strange black horse with a low cultivation but terrifying strength, would cause some disciples who originally had a chance to enter the top 10 to lose prematurely. For example, the mutated lightning spiritual root disciple Ma Dongui. He was close to 20 years old, and his cultivation level was almost at the peak of the Qi refinement realm. He was one of the people with the most advantage in this martial competition. In addition to having a powerful variant lightning spiritual root, let alone top 10, the difficulty of reaching the top 5 was not too high. On the other hand, Jiang Li's cultivation was only at the intermediate stage of the Qi refinement realm a few days ago. In the eyes of the higher-ups of the sect who were unaware of the situation, he was the type of disciple that would be eliminated in the first 2 rounds. Who would have thought that he would be such an unexpected black horse? Jiang Li crushed his way through and entered the last round. The appearance of an outstanding disciple was naturally a good thing, but it was a pity that a few powerful competitors had fallen just like that. Therefore, in these 3 days, the 255 disciples who had failed would participate in an additional battle and compete for the qualifications to enter the final round together. After leaving the venue, Jiang Li rejected the invitation of his senior brothers to spar. After that, he seemed to have thought of something and did not return to his small courtyard to cultivate. Instead, he went all the way to the outer sect. He did not look for Yan Hong directly. Instead, he walked into the residential area of the outer sect and stood in front of a dilapidated hut. This small house was tattered and torn. Even in the outer sect, only the lowest-level disciples who had yet to enter the Qi refinement realm would be pushed aside to stay in this place. Bang! Jiang Li kicked the door open, and the moist and smelly air in the room assaulted his senses. This smell was very unsuitable for living creatures with noses. Frowning, he took 2 steps back and took a deep breath. Then, he blew a gust of wind into the house. A bone-chilling cold wind poured into the dilapidated house. Although Jiang Li had already reduced the power as much as possible, the simple and crude house was still blown until it creaked and swayed. The paper window on the opposite wall was blown to pieces, and most of the roof tiles were also sent flying. Cough, cough, tilde, cough, cough, tilde, spare me, tilde, stop, tilde, spare me, tilde. A weak cry came from the hut, but Jiang Li ignored it. After blowing for a moment longer and waiting for the air in the hut to be refreshed, he walked in. There was no furniture in this dilapidated house, only a broken bed with uneven legs and a black blanket covering it. On the bed, there was a skinny disciple lying there. That disciple's condition looked pretty bad. His eyes were swollen, and his dark eye bags were almost hanging down. His lips and nails were also in a rotting color. His body was still emitting a stench that was exactly the same as the smell in the room earlier. This fellow had just been affected by Jiang Li's cold wind again. His body, which was already at its limit, could barely tremble from time to time. His body's instinctive reaction to the cold was about to disappear. Anyone who looked at him would know that he would not live past tonight. Jiang Li raised his hand and shot out a black light, directly sending the ghost into his brain. The other party's mind was ravaged, and he was unable to resist the ghost. However, after several attempts, the memories that it had stolen were all incomplete, and they were unable to piece together what Jiang Li wanted. Jiang Li was a little disappointed, but he had already expected this. "Wu Liang, do you still want to live?" Jiang Li glanced at him, without any sympathy in his eyes. When this outer sect disciple, who was lying on the bed, heard Jiang Li's voice, he opened his eyes with difficulty before looking at him. However, with a single glance, the outer sect disciple called Wu Liang became excited, and his chest rose and fell violently as he struggled to pounce towards Jiang Li. However, his current body did not allow him to do this. In the end, his body fell off the bed, almost causing him to die. Wu Liang lay on the ground. He raised his hand and pointed at Jiang Li as he spoke with all his might. It's you, cough, I've seen your face before, you, cough, what have you done to me?" Jiang Li remained unmoved as he looked at the embarrassed and furious outer sect disciple. This Wu Liang was the green-robed immortal trafficker who Jiang Li had fed 8 waste pills to at the outer sect graveyard earlier. A total of 8 waste pills. This large amount of pill poisoning caused Wu Liang's mid-stage qi refinement realm cultivation to vanish overnight. His spiritual root was tainted, and his foundation was completely destroyed. He directly became a cripple. After waking up, the first thing he encountered was the robbery of his 7 friends. After everything of value was snatched away, he returned to the outer sect with difficulty. However, his retribution was not over yet. After he was discovered to have lost his cultivation and was about to die, even the small house that he originally lived in was seized by someone. If he were to give it some thought, he would suffer a beating. Although Jiang Li had not experienced too many battles between outer sect disciples, the cruelty within was still vivid in his mind. Therefore, after being fed with waste pills in just a day's time, this Wu Liang had fallen to such a state. He waited painfully in this broken house for death. If there was no transmigrator coming after him, he would probably become a pile of rotting flesh that even flies would not eat in a few days. "Do you still want to live?" Jiang Li did not answer the other party's question. He repeated what he had said earlier. After saying that, he flicked a seed from his finger and threw it into the ground. A wave of spiritual qi that carried dense vitality rippled slightly, and a few tree branches quickly broke out of the ground. After a few breaths of time, they weaved into a chair behind Jiang Li. Jiang Li sat down calmly and waited for the other party to answer. He seemed to be very patient. "You cough, 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 can you let me live?" Wu Liang coughed violently again. After spitting out a mouthful of black phlegm, he finally finished speaking. "Naturally, I can detoxify my own poison. Not only can I keep you alive, I can also give you this." Jiang Li sat on a chair and took out 2 porcelain bottles. One of them was the few leftover detoxification pills that Jiang Li had eaten earlier, and the other was the bottle of green-robed immortal he obtained from the other party. That detoxification pill naturally could not really remove the influence of the pill poison. However, the other party did not know what poison he was affected by. It was completely enough to lie to him. "Give it to me, give it to me, give that to me. Cough, cough, tilde, just one sniff, I just want one sniff." When Wu Liang saw the bottle of green-robed immortal, he squeezed out some strength from somewhere and dragged his ruined body towards Jiang Li. It could be seen just how exaggerated the reliance on the drug caused by the green-robed immortal was. Wu Liang's obsession with it was even greater than his life. In his eyes there was no longer the antidote, only the green-robed immortal. Wu Liang struggled to crawl over, but Jiang Li did not want this guy to touch him. He casually formed a spell technique, and two green vines stretched out from the ground and tied Wu Liang to the ground. The strength of Jiang Li's spiritual qi was astonishing. The binding spell technique he used was something that ordinary late-stage qi refinement realm disciples could not break free from. How could a dying person escape from it? "So do you want to live?" Jiang Li asked this question for the third time. He was a polite person, and he did not like others to be disrespectful to him, especially when that person was younger than him. In addition, if this thing on the ground could not even obey and answer such simple questions, then he had no value to speak of. Wu Liang, who was on the ground, recovered from his madness. He could not understand why Jiang Li would insist on this question. He only wanted to obtain the green-robed immortal as soon as possible. However, the situation was obvious. Jiang Li did not care about this trafficker's pleading at all. Moreover, he slowly told Wu Liang that if he did not cooperate and speak properly, he might die on the spot. I want to live." Wu Liang forced himself to calm down and answered Jiang Li's question. Jiang Li nodded in satisfaction. He opened the porcelain bottle and dabbed a little green powder on the ground in front of the other party. Wu Liang was immediately overjoyed. He did not mind the dirty mud, carefully bringing his nose close to the green powder and taking a deep breath. Then, a look of deep enjoyment appeared on his face, as if all of the pain in his body disappeared without a trace. The bits of green powder on the ground were quickly sucked in, but Wu Liang was clearly not satisfied. He put his face close to the ground and rubbed it back and forth, even rubbing off a layer of black soil. His performance was really disgusting. Give me another sniff. Cough, cough, tilde, I beg you, just one last sniff." Indeed, no matter which world it was, the words of drug abusers could not be trusted. He had asked for one sniff earlier, and now he wanted another. He would never be satisfied after this. Jiang Li looked at him plainly. His enjoyment quickly turned into pain. He even used his head to hit the ground to ease the intense discomfort caused by his reliance on drugs. He did not look like a human at all. "If you want this green-robed immortal, I can give it to you. However, you have to answer a few questions." Jiang Li placed the bottle in front of him. He shook it back and forth, attracting the other party's gaze that stayed glued to the drug. "I'll tell you, cough, 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 I'll tell you everything." Wu Liang hurriedly agreed. Without the green-robed immortal, he could not endure it any longer. "Very good, tell me, where did you buy this green-robed immortal? What's the seller's background? What's his price? Are there any higher quality goods?" In fact, after Jiang Li returned from visiting Elder Lin Fengying that day, he had already understood the situation of the green-robed immortal. Just as Jiang Li had guessed, a status called Green Elegance appeared on his interface. The green-robed immortal could stimulate one's mind for a short period of time, making them feel as if they were floating among the clouds. In terms of attributes, it had quite a good strengthening effect on a cultivator's mind and enlightenment. However, the temporary effect of forced stimulation would cause double the harm later on. It was an extremely unworthy and unreliable thing. It was purely harmful. Drug dependence, low spirit, and neurological weakness. If the situation was serious, it might even cause the permanent decrease in spiritual perception, or even central nervous system damage, paralysis, and death. The notification on the interface showed that Green Elegance lasted for 5 minutes. After it ended, green sorrow would be inflicted. The consequences were so terrifying that even Jiang Li felt a little fearful. However, during the 5 minutes of Green Elegance, the effect of just a fingernail size of the drug was not inferior to the expensive concentration incense. The difference in value was at least 100 times. This was the difference between having side effects and not having side effects. Of course, Jiang Li was not someone who lacked that bit of money. No one would use something that harmful to cultivate. However, Wu Liang did not think so. You also used the green-robed immortal. Cough cough tilde you used it too. In his opinion, Jiang Li asked this not because he wanted to take down the green-robed immortal's trading network. He thought that Jiang Li was also under the drug effects. The moment he heard that, the fellow's spirit was stirred. His bloodshot eyes started to move around dishonestly. Clearly, he had some crooked thoughts again. Give me the green-robed immortal and the antidote. Cough, cough, cough. Give me the 2 bottles of the green-robed immortal and the antidote. Cough, cough. Give me more spirit stones. I'll help you buy them when I recover. After thinking for a while, Wu Liang actually said such a thing. Jiang Li was shocked as well. Where did he get his courage from? Do you think that's possible? What right does a dying person have to negotiate with me? With a thought, one of the vines binding his opponent immediately tightened. Soon, there was a cracking sound as his calf was broken. The intense pain made Wu Liang suck in a cold breath. The smelly cold sweat quickly soaked his clothes. However, he was still smiling. Although his smile was ugly, he felt that victory was already in his grasp. I'm the only one. In Scripture Storage Valley, only I can get the green-robed immortal. Haha, you can't live without it. You can't stop taking it, right? That green-robed immortal won't last much longer. Haha, cough, cough, cough. It won't be long. It won't be long before you die of pain. Only I can help you. As he spoke, Wu Liang revealed an excited expression. He felt that he had already captured Jiang Li in his palm. He knew very well the feeling of being unable to satisfy his reliance on drugs. No one could resist such torture. When Jiang Li's green-robed immortal ran out, he would definitely beg him. At that time, what kind of situation would it be if he controlled an inner sect disciple? He did not have to worry about not having enough drugs anymore. No, not just that. Humph, not only could he get rid of this problem, he could even make use of the resources of the inner sect disciple to advance further. At that time, he would definitely trample all those who kicked him while he was down. However, before he could dream about dominating the world, something that he could not understand happened. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? Cough, 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 stop, hurry, cough, cough, stop. Jiang Li got up and walked to a smelly ditch at the entrance. He opened the lid of the green-robed immortal and started to pour it out. When Wu Liang saw this scene, he was so agitated that it was as if he saw his lifeline being taken away to be dumped. He cried out in pain. A moment later, Jiang Li stopped pouring and shook it. There was not much left inside. There's only 1/3 left. If you talk any more nonsense, I'll pour it all down. You won't have a chance to sniff the green-robed immortal until you die. Jiang Li was very determined, not to mention that his cheat made him completely unafraid of these side effects. Even if he did not use the cheat, his strong physique was enough to allow him to easily escape the dependence of drugs, of course. The strong physique actually came from the cheat. The green-robed immortal was worthless to begin with. It was useless to leave it around. It was only harming others. So what if he emptied it? He looked for this fellow for the sake of saving trouble. This fellow was related to those drug networks. If he spoke the truth, Jiang Li would only have to hand over the information, and the outer sect of the Scripture Storage Valley would regain its peace. Jiang Li's actions completely crushed Wu Liang's fantasy. He looked at Jiang Li in surprise and uncertainty. He wanted to test him with words again, but if he said one more word, Jiang Li would immediately start to discard the powder. Helpless, this guy could only tell him everything he knew. Chapter 134, The Lonely Defender on Stage. After settling the issue here, Jiang Li reported the information to the Demon Vanquishing Hall. This sort of thing was under the jurisdiction of the Demon Vanquishing Hall to begin with, and Elder He attached great importance to it. Who was the mastermind? He actually dared to stretch his dirty hands into the Scripture Storage Valley. Did he really think that the 4 great hooligans of the Great Mountain were useless? What mastermind? What untouchable network? That was only true for outer sect disciples and ordinary rogue cultivators. What if they had the so-called powerful backers? No matter how strong they were, could there be a nascent soul cultivator? In other words, would nascent soul cultivators be greedy for such small gains? If they started a sect, countless people would swarm over in support. Therefore, the high-level cultivators behind these networks could not be nascent soul or even golden core cultivators. It was already the limit for them to be at the foundation establishment or core formation realm. Therefore, the Scripture Storage Valley was not afraid of such people. They immediately gathered many elders and disciples and organized an emergency operation to subdue the offenders. With a thunderous strike, they annihilated this group of evil demons. According to the clues provided by Jiang Li, it was said that the operation was going quite smoothly. There were also several famous demonic cultivators and a small sect who had succumbed to greed. However, because Jiang Li was preparing for the sect martial competition, and his cultivation had reached a critical moment, he did not participate in this operation. It was quite a pity. On Jiang Li's interface, after he added the new status that day, his mind and enlightenment attributes received a drastic change again. Affected by this, the great carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, that had been stagnant and unable to improve for a long time, finally obtained a breakthrough in these 2 days. In his sea of consciousness, Jiang Li's consciousness shook lightly, and another parallel mind split out from between his brows. The palm-sized parallel mind landed on the ground. It had a nose and eyes, and its thoughts were clear and agile. It was almost no different from the main body. The connected consciousness turned from 2 to 3. That feeling was indeed very wonderful. The most obvious change was that the strength of the body that had not been completely grasped had become extremely well controlled under the cooperation of the main body and the second parallel mind. This feeling of perfectly controlling his strength was something that Jiang Li had not experienced in a long time. Apart from that, Jiang Li also thought of another method to use it. That was the flaw of being unable to move when using the Overlord body art. When Jiang Li had a parallel mind in his body, theoretically speaking, he could use 2 different attribute spell techniques at the same time. He could even cultivate body refinement and chi refinement spell techniques at the same time. Then, while maintaining the Overlord body art, it might also be possible that he could use the parallel mind to activate the power of the armored horse divine travel. As he thought like this, Jiang Li began to try. The strength in his entire body contracted. After wrapping spiritual qi around him, it spread evenly throughout his body, causing his body to seem as if it was made of molten iron and become indestructible. At this moment, the muscles on Jiang Li's legs had completely constricted, causing his joints to stiffen and be unable to move at all. However, in his legs, other than the most basic muscle strength, there was also an even more powerful force, the armored horse divine travel. His parallel mind quickly connected to this force. With a thought, his originally stiff legs suddenly moved, and he agilely ran forward. The situation was smooth beyond Jiang Li's expectations. Bang! Jiang Li had just gotten excited when his head collided with the wall in front of him. Fortunately, this cultivation chamber was the most expensive and sturdy place in the entire small courtyard. Even though Jiang Li had collided with it, only a small depression appeared, and it was not too damaged. He had gotten too carried away. The meditation room was so small, yet he dared to run using the power of the armored horse divine travel. It would be a wonder if he did not crash into something. However, this small matter was not a big deal. He could practice a little outside, and this cooperation would be resolved quickly. Many of the problems that Jiang Li was extremely troubled about previously were easily resolved. He could even use his parallel mind to cultivate a second cultivation method at the same time, greatly accelerating his cultivation. Leaving a parallel mind in his body could actually bring so many benefits to Jiang Li. Right now, he could not bear to send out this parallel mind. Or perhaps, he had long regretted turning the first parallel mind into a sword cultivator clone. Occasionally, he would send it into the bodies of mayflies, mosquitoes, flies, butterflies, and other short-lived insects to obtain a short period of comprehension. It could improve his mental power and advance his cultivation of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra. However, if it was a long-term clone like the sword cultivator clone, even though Jiang Li already had a target, that second parallel mind would definitely be able to bring him great benefits. The issue was that, in a short period of time, the parallel mind that could not be retrieved would cause Jiang Li's Bodhisattva Heart Sutra cultivation to stop. His mind and enlightenment attributes would not increase further. This would cause quite a bit of trouble for him. So, after weighing the pros and cons, Jiang Li decided to temporarily suppress a certain thought in his heart. 3 days later, the final round of the sect competition officially began. The enormous floating platform in the sky was divided into 5. 11 outstanding foundation establishment disciples below the age of 30 would be competing for the top 5. In front of the 10 venues on the ground, the 22 Qi refinement realm disciples were already itching to try. In this final round of the martial arts competition, besides needing extraordinary strength, one had to have the confidence to go on stage to defend their spot, have the courage to challenge others, have the wisdom to accurately judge the situation, have the ability to judge the strength of the challengers, and even have the luck to take advantage of the situation. These factors would ultimately affect the final rankings. For example, there was a possibility of a tag team battle in this round. Even if one was very strong, they could not withstand the continuous attacks of others. Therefore, the best and wisest choice at this time should be to watch from the bottom of the ring. After figuring out their position compared to everyone's strength, they would find a ring that was not too close to the front positions and had less intense competition to defend. Along with the passage of time, due to the intense competition in the nearby arenas, the disciples in charge of guarding the arenas would definitely suffer great losses. At that time, if they went forward to challenge others, perhaps they would be able to defeat the strong while being weak, and this method was undoubtedly the best solution for sensible people. On the contrary, in this ranking competition, the bravest thing to do, or rather, the stupidest and most brainless thing to do, was to be the first to go on stage and defend the arena that represented the first place, the A stage. Dong! A heavy knock sounded on the gong. The 17 disciples who won the first round and the 5 disciples who won the next round did not move. For a time, they looked at each other, their eyes shining with wisdom. Then, at this moment, a burly figure yawned in boredom and stepped out of the crowd. Then, the tip of his feet left the ground as he directly jumped onto the A stage that represented the champion of the Qi refinement realm. What, aren't we going to start? Jiang Li rubbed his sleepy eyes and looked at the 21 senior brothers who still had not moved. The 21 Qi refinement realm disciples below the stage looked at each other, not knowing what to say to Jiang Li. They really admired Jiang Li, this person who broke the stalemate, but whether he was brave or stupid depended on whether he could stand firmly on the stage. While the 21 disciples were calculating, the first brave, stupid disciple had already appeared. Now, who was going to be the second brave soul? A moment later, a disciple with a sword on his back shook his head and sneered. After he walked out of the crowd, he similarly leaped onto the stage and stood before Jiang Li. However, based on his expression, his sneer was not targeted at Jiang Li, and it was a form of self-ridicule. Junior brother Jiang Li is brave. As senior brothers, we feel ashamed of our inferiority. The sword-bearing disciple cupped his hands towards Jiang Li, and he seemed to be extremely displeased by his earlier hesitation. His praise towards Jiang Li was sincere. Senior brother is too polite. It's just that I, junior brother, have fought 4 rounds in this arena A and have some feelings towards it. I naturally have to continue fighting here. Jiang Li returned the greeting, but the ease in his tone was obvious. I'm not brave, I'm just confident. Ha ha ha, junior brother, you're right. A sword cultivator should be brave. Mu Luo will be your first opponent. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword behind him flew out automatically and landed in his palm. Jiang Li was stunned. He looked at the other party and also became serious. This senior brother was obviously a sword cultivator as well. However, unlike Xianxia, who was an embarrassment, the sword in this senior brother's hand gave Jiang Li a familiar feeling. It was the feeling of the sword heart talent. Jiang Li had experienced the wonders of the sword heart quite a few times through his parallel mind, so it was impossible for him to not recognize this little thing. However, were there still disciples who had talent in sword heart, but did not choose to join the Shu Mountain 5 Elements peak. The green sword in senior brother Mu Luo's hand shook slightly, but he did not throw it out. Instead, he held the spirit sword in his hand as he walked step by step towards Jiang Li. When Jiang Li saw this, he was even more surprised. He did not expect that this senior brother was actually a non-mainstream person. He did not cultivate sword kinesis, but instead practiced swordsmanship. Jiang Li's mouth curled up slightly, and his fists were covered in a layer of pitch black as he walked towards the other party. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, their speed gradually increased. The attainments in movement techniques of the sword cultivator, Mu Luo, were truly rather extraordinary. His feet were swift and illusory, and after a short moment, his entire body moved along with the sword. He actually transformed into a gust of wind and dragon roar as he charged towards Jiang Li. That scene could be said to be as ethereal as an immortal. If the other party was said to be a breeze, then Jiang Li was a heavy truck that was speeding at full speed. His entire body carried a tremendous force as it concentrated on the iron fist. Ding! Amidst the crisp sound of metal colliding, the sword edge that stabbed forward collided with Jiang Li's fist. The stalemate only lasted for a short moment before the gust of wind was defeated by Jiang Li. Under the pressure of the enormous force, the sharp longsword bent extremely flexibly. Then, all of the power passed through the spirit sword and landed on the sword cultivator Mu Luo, sending him flying several times faster than when he had arrived. It felt too light. This was the first feeling Jiang Li had after he blasted his opponent flying. At least 30–40% of his strength had been dispersed by his opponent's movement technique, and the remaining strength was buffered by the spirit sword, so he should be unable to heavily injure his opponent. As expected, the figure that was sent flying was carried by the wind again. After flying outside the area of the arena, not only was he not captured by the gravitational force and fell to the ground, he even rode his artifact to rise into the sky. It had long been said that Jiang Li would be at a disadvantage when facing an agile opponent, and he had never had such a chance to experience it. Now, he had finally encountered it. Let's see how much force you can deflect from my next punch. Jiang Li smiled and assumed a high jump position. He clenched his fists and was about to jump again. However, a sharp pain came from his fist. Jiang Li stopped what he was doing and raised his right hand to look. On the third knuckle of his right hand, a bright red bloody hole had actually appeared on the hardest part of his fist. The collision just now had clearly broken his defense. As expected of the sword heart talent, this senior brother Mu Luo's sword heart should be close to awakening. To be able to break through Jiang Li's skin defense at the Qi refinement realm, he would definitely be a genius disciple, even on the Shu Mountain 5 Elements peak. Although it had only taken a few breaths of time for the small hole to completely heal and no traces could be seen, it was still a fact that he had broken through Jiang Li's defense. Armament hard skin really can't keep up with my growth. Looks like I have to get the Overlord status as soon as possible. Jiang Li stood on the combat ring and muttered to himself. When he saw that the bloody hole on his hand had completely healed, a thought arose in his mind. Swoosh! The chains on his waist automatically flew out and nimbly climbed up to wrap around Jiang Li's fists. Soon, they formed 2 pitch-black iron chain gauntlets. The 2 fists collided, and a metallic sound immediately sounded. Senior brother Mu Luo, I apologize in advance. The sword cultivator Mu Luo, who was flying in the sky, was gasping for air with lingering fear. He used his sleeve to wipe away the bright red blood flowing out of the corner of his mouth. He looked down in disbelief. It was one thing for his right hand to not be crippled when he used a fist to collide with the tip of the wind chant's sword, but how could he possibly send him flying with a punch? At this moment, his spirit sword was still sending him mournful sounds. The body of the wind chant's sword was flexible, and under the punch earlier, it was fortunate that it was not directly broken. However, such brute force still caused it to be unable to avoid suffering heavy damages. The sword light flowing on the edge of the sword was already unstable. The sword cultivator should be brave, but they should not seek death. He was currently thinking about how he should admit defeat in order to appear more elegant. Then he heard Jiang Li's shout, "Apologize in advance." Boom! The platform below, which had been augmented by the runic array formation, finally could not withstand the immense force. A half-meter deep hole appeared in the center. Then there was the intense sound of air being torn apart. When Jiang Li's figure appeared again, he had already appeared above Mu Luo. Immediately, a fist wrapped in layers of chains smashed down. Mu Luo was so frightened that his soul was about to fly out. However, with an iron fist coming at him, he had no choice. He swung his sword horizontally in an attempt to block it. Ding! The wind chant's sword howled madly as it received a heavy blow that it could not endure at its level. A trace of blood sprayed through the sky. Senior brother Mu Luo spat out a mouthful and fell back to the ground. However, he was indeed a genius. Before he landed, he was once again surrounded by a breeze, dissipating most of the momentum. He could still stand firmly on the stage. Impressive. Looks like I can use a bit more force. Jiang Li threw out a floating wooden piece from behind him. After crushing it with one foot, he borrowed the recoil to smash back to the ground even faster. Then, he threw out another punch. Before the fist and the sword were about to collide, Jiang Li seemed to have seen senior brother Mu Luo's mouth move a few times, but because it was filled with blood, he was unable to speak in the end. The fist and sword collided again. The fist that was wrapped in the indestructible dragon imprisoning lock naturally could not be injured again. Instead, an even heavier fist pressed down on the spirit sword and smashed into the chest of the other party. Then, senior brother Mu Luo's body flew out like an arrow. An elder rushed over and caught Mu Luo in the air, preventing him from crashing into the audience. A few disciples of the rejuvenation hall quickly went up to treat him. They cast spell techniques into Mu Luo's body and quickly healed his injuries. Although his condition was not good, he could still go on stage after meditating for a while. After observing for a moment, the core formation elder raised his head and took a deep look at Jiang Li on the platform. He did not blame Jiang Li for being too heavy-handed, but it was the opposite. The injuries that the sword cultivator suffered from the last punch were not serious. In fact, they could be considered light. The disciple of the head elder of the demon vanquishing hall was probably much stronger than he appeared to be, since he was able to stop so accurately under such circumstances. Jiang Li stood on the arena and was eager to give it a try. This senior brother Mu Luo was actually able to receive 3 of his punches, and this caused Jiang Li to deeply feel that there was always someone better than him. Right now, he was halfway through his warm-up. He immediately cast his expectant gaze towards the remaining 20 Qi Refinement Realm disciples to see who would go on stage to fight him. However, what greeted him was stunned silence as everyone avoided his gaze. The genius with the lightning spiritual root, Ma Dongui, acted as if he did not see Jiang Li. He scratched his head before jumping onto the B stage beside Jiang Li. The other disciples seemed to have awakened from a dream, and all of them jumped onto the arena to compete. As a result, the other 9 arenas were in full swing, and only Jiang Li guarded the empty arena by himself, feeling extremely lonely. Didn't they say that a stage would be the most intense battlefield? Why are they ignoring me? Jiang Li, who showed a face of helplessness, stood on the empty arena by himself. Now Jiang Li finally knew the benefits of pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. If he did not act weak, not to mention a tiger, he would not even be able to eat a pig. Jiang Li was a little depressed. Under the gazes of everyone, he felt very awkward standing alone. Chapter 135, The Sixth Floating Arena. Valley Master, it seems that no one is going to challenge that, a stage. An elder noticed the situation in the Qi refinement realm arena below. This kind of situation, where no one dared to fight the arena's defender, was rare. The last time such a situation occurred, it seemed to be Chu Yunxuan's batch. When the master of the scripture storage valley, Taoist Wuxia, heard this, he withdrew his gaze from the foundation establishment stage and looked at the battlefield below. Then he saw a familiar figure. It's this kid again. As they looked at Jiang Li, who had created a rocking chair with a technique and was lying bored on the combat ring, all the higher-ups could not help but chuckle. This disciple of Elder He really had some of the demeanor that his master had when he was young. He was really very indecent. It seems that the champion of the Qi refinement realm disciples has been decided. Junior brother He, congratulations. Thank you, Elder He. This group of elders had seen Jiang Li's several rounds of fights in the long, clear hall. At their level, they could naturally tell that Jiang Li's physical cultivation level had already surpassed the Qi refinement realm. If the other disciples wanted to win against him, it would undoubtedly be extremely difficult. In their eyes, just the foundation establishment realm dragon tortoise blood tattoo on Jiang Li's body was enough to put a terrifying distance between him and the other Qi refinement realm disciples. This was the power of the secret technique beast blood diagram. An outstanding blood tattoo could completely help cultivators crush their peers easily. Of course, the elders did not know that the dragon tortoise was captured by Jiang Li himself. Before he gained the dragon tortoise blood tattoo, his strength was already extraordinary. With the two factors combined, Jiang Li naturally became even more invincible. Senior brother, you must be joking. My disciple is naughty and mischievous. I've embarrassed myself in front of you and the elders. Although he was humble, Elder He was very satisfied with this disciple of his. Now that he had gotten the first place in Qi refinement, he had to think of what he could reward him with. Junior brother He, to be honest, how strong is this disciple of yours? Can he actually fight a foundation establishment disciple? The Valley Master, Taoist Wuxia, did not look at the 5 floating stages that were currently striking out with spiritual Qi fluctuations. Instead, he stared at Jiang Li below with interest. Regarding this, I'm not afraid to be laughed at, but senior brother Jiang Li is very shrewd and cunning. He always likes to hide things. Even as his master, I don't really understand his full strength. Elder He recalled what Liu Mulan had told him before. This disciple of his, Jiang Li, secretly possessed a speed that he could not control. Who knew if he was hiding something else from him? However, he usually practices with my other disciples. I think it shouldn't be a problem for him to deal with ordinary foundation establishment disciples. Elder He thought for a moment and felt that since Jiang Li was able to hunt the dragon tortoise alone, his strength should not be lower than this. Junior brother He, why don't we test your disciple? The horsetail whisk in Taoist Wuxia's hand fluttered. It was unknown if it was because he thought of Chu Yunxuan, whom he believed to be his legacy inheritor, or something else. Senior brother, what do you mean? After that, he followed the other party's gaze and understood what his senior brother meant. That was rather interesting. Elder He, who liked to lock his disciples and demon beasts together and watch them fight desperately, was famous for enjoying huge commotions. The two of them looked at each other and revealed expressions of tacit understanding. After that, they looked at the other elders who were puzzled by this. Elders, what do you think? A moment later, all the higher-ups and elders in the hall revealed interested expressions. All of them looked towards Jiang Li, who was on the stage below. Obviously, a terrifying plot was brewing. If Jiang Li saw this scene at this moment, he would definitely be shocked for an entire year. All along, in Jiang Li's heart, these senior members of the sect with unfathomable cultivations should be sagely and respected wise men, or old antiques that followed the rules strictly. Who would have thought that this group of high-level cultivators, who were all 150 years old at least, would actually still want to have fun every day? Jiang Li, who was lying on the rocking chair and wasting time on the arena, suddenly felt as if there were rays of light on his back, and it was as if many pairs of eyes with ill intent were staring at him. Jumping up from the rocking chair, he looked around, seeking the source of the danger. Then he saw the expression of the senior sister of the Rejuvenation Hall, who had been guarding the gong beside him and also had nothing to do, freeze suddenly. Yes, 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 disciple understands. Then, as if someone was whispering in her ear, she nodded and responded. However, Jiang Li could not hear it at all. A moment later, Junior brother Jiang Li, the Valley Master asked you not to be so lazy. The better your results, the more rewards you will receive. The senior sister left behind these words without rhyme or reason, and as soon as she finished speaking, she jumped off the arena and stood on the empty ground at the side. She even waved her hand at Jiang Li as if she was saying goodbye to him. Lazy, what do you mean? Jiang Li raised his head and looked in the direction of the long clear hall, feeling a little puzzled. The better his results, what sort of result could surpass first place? Could it be that the Valley Master wanted him to kick all the Qi refinement disciples out of the arena? Did he have to occupy all 10 rings by himself? This was not good. Subsequently, before Jiang Li could let his imagination run wild for long, the ring beneath his feet suddenly shook. Jiang Li was shocked. After stabilizing himself, he immediately assumed a defensive posture. He subconsciously thought that someone had launched a sneak attack. However, soon, the arena that was slowly rising up from the ground made him develop of a bad guess. A better result could it be? Jiang Li was dumbfounded, and so were the surrounding disciples. How could such a huge platform fly up so easily? Had the array formation malfunctioned? The A stage seems to have flown up. Rubbish, such a huge spirit array platform is already flying. Could our eyes be playing tricks on us? But senior brother Jiang Li seems to still be up there. What is he going to do? Did someone apply to fight senior brother Jiang Li in the air? But I haven't seen any other senior brothers go on stage. Could it be that senior brother Jiang Li has broken through to the Foundation establishment realm? Is that why he wants to participate in the Foundation establishment competition? How is that possible? Senior brother Jiang Li has only entered the sect for less than a year. How could anyone succeed in building their foundation so quickly? It's impossible even for the top-grade spiritual root disciples. Everyone, including Jiang Li, did not guess what the higher-ups of the sect thought at the first moment because it was simply outrageous. A few minutes later, the stage Jiang Li was in floated to the same height as the 5 floating stages, and it became the 6th stage on the Foundation establishment battlefield. He stood alone on the stage, but like the stage below, he stood out very much. Junior brother, this is the floating arena for Foundation building disciples. You shouldn't be here. Leave quickly. In the last round of the Foundation establishment battles, a total of 11 outstanding disciples were competing in 5 floating stages. Right now, on the 5 stages, there were 2 pairs. A total of 10 disciples were fighting. The last person was free. He flew in the air, waiting for the opportunity to issue a challenge. After he noticed Jiang Li, who had suddenly appeared, this disciple's occupational disease suddenly acted up, and he came forward to skillfully drive Jiang Li away. The Foundation establishment senior brother was dressed in black, and he was standing on a flying sword. He had a long saber on his waist, and his characteristics were obvious. All the disciples in the Scripture Storage Valley could tell that he was a law enforcement disciple of the Law Enforcement Hall. Only disciples of the Law Enforcement Hall would develop such a habit of meddling in other people's business. However, without needing Jiang Li to answer, the Foundation establishment law enforcement disciple had just finished speaking when his expression turned as stunned as the senior sister from the Rejuvenation Hall. A voice transmission that no one could hear entered his ears. It was obvious that the sect elder was talking to him. "Senior brother, do you understand now?" Jiang Li shrugged helplessly. He still had not figured out what the higher-ups of the sect wanted to do. The strength he had always revealed was only at the level of an ordinary Foundation establishment cultivator. When he sparred with his senior brothers and sisters, he had always been more restrained. The strength he displayed was always slightly inferior. How could they think that they could defeat the strongest 11 people in the Foundation establishment realm, below the age of 30, in the Scripture Storage Valley? Moreover, so what if he won a few of them? In the competition for the share of the Medicine Garden Mystic Realm, the Qi Refinement Realm and the Foundation Establishment Realm were separated. He could not help them anyway. Jiang Li was instinctively resistant to this sort of pointless display, but in the next moment he was slightly stunned. In his ear he heard the deep voice of his master, Elder He, mixed with the roars of subtle beasts. "Regarding the reward for getting the top 5 spot, I guarantee you'll be satisfied." Elder He only said this sentence, but Jiang Li sneered at this. Who did he think Jiang Li was? So what if there was a reward? "I, Jiang Li, merely love to fight on the stage." "Yes, master, I understand." The bored Jiang Li instantly became energetic. On the opposite side, the law enforcement disciple who landed on the stage raised his head and just happened to end the voice transmission conversation. He raised his head to look at Jiang Li, and a trace of disdain could still be seen in his eyes. "I've already heard the whole story. Since it's arranged by the Valley Master and the Elders as a disciple, I naturally have to obey. However, junior brother, I hope that you can admit defeat and return to the surface to have a proper martial arts competition. You should understand that it's impossible for Qi Refinement Realm disciples to defeat Foundation Establishment Realm cultivators. If you continue, the one who will suffer in the end will only be you." An aura erupted from that senior brother's body, and he showed Jiang Li his cultivation and strength without any fear. If it were an ordinary Qi Refinement Realm disciple, they would have long kowtowed, begged for mercy, and retreated. This was his experience from enforcing the law. It had been tested time and again. Unfortunately, it was not a weak and helpless outer sect disciple that stood before him, but the disciple of the head elder of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, Jiang Li. Junior brother appreciates senior brother's good intentions. However, please make a move quickly. After I'm done fighting senior brother, I still have to challenge the rings later. As he spoke, Jiang Li's gaze had already shot towards the other 5 arenas not far away, and he seemed to really want to end the battle as soon as possible. He utterly did not take this enforcement disciple seriously. "Hee, how arrogant. Don't think that you can ignore us seniors just because you're the first in the Qi Refinement Realm. You don't understand the power of the Foundation Establishment Realm at all." That disciple was very displeased by Jiang Li's attitude. After all, he was still a senior brother. This was too outrageous. The more he spoke, the more agitated he became. The aura on his body became slightly stronger. Wasn't he afraid that he would expend too much of his spiritual qi just to create this useless aura? Sigh, what a bad temper. Jiang Li sighed. He was completely disappointed in the disciples of the Law Enforcement Hall. The special nature of their work put them in an emotional state of arrogance. They were used to offending people with their words, for example, "What are you looking at? Stare at me and I'll make sure you regret it." They generally believed that only anger could control the tens of thousands of disciples from the outer sect. After a long time, they had gotten used to tyrannizing others. Jiang Li did not expect his few words to be able to change their character, so he was unwilling to say anything to the senior who was up his own ass. With a tap of his foot, a piece of shattered rock was kicked flying, bringing about a whistling sound as it smashed into the gong that flew up along with the arena. Dong! The sound of the gong meant the start of a battle. "You don't know what's good for you." The Foundation Establishment disciple's expression was as black as the bottom of a pot, believing that Jiang Li had wasted his good intentions. Therefore, he did not want to waste any more time talking. He pointed his finger at the flying sword floating in the air. The flying sword, or rather, the sword-shaped artifact, suddenly erupted with a burst of extremely powerful spiritual qi and shot towards Jiang Li. The place he aimed at was not a vital spot, but it was enough to teach this arrogant qi refinement realm junior brother a lesson. However, at the next moment, swoosh! A pitch-black chain flew out from Jiang Li's waist, and it curled and pulled against the sword-shaped artifact that shot over, causing it to be directly bound tightly, despite having extraordinary might. The dragon imprisoning lock immediately flickered with a dark light, and a terrifying binding and suppression force acted on it. In an instant, it completely exhausted the spiritual qi on the sword-shaped artifact, and it directly descended to the ground before being firmly stepped on by Jiang Li. In terms of flying swords and sword-shaped artifacts, there was almost no difference in their appearance. However, their essence was two completely different things. The simplest difference was that the most important thing to drive the flying sword was still the sword techniques cultivated by sword cultivators. Sword-shaped artifacts relied completely on the artifact itself. What cultivators needed was only to provide spiritual qi and point out their targets. From the sound of it, a sword-shaped artifact seemed to be more convenient than it was cost-effective. It did not require a cultivator to do anything to unleash its power. However, such sword-shaped artifacts were actually things that true sword cultivators did not fancy. True flying swords could often accompany a cultivator for life and become stronger together with a sword cultivator. In theory, there was no limit to the power of a flying sword. As for a sword-shaped artifact, it was ultimately just an artifact. Unless one paid a huge price to reforge it, the upper limit of it had been set since the beginning of the forging. If this thing was a flying sword, with the external support provided by the sword cultivator, it might be able to struggle a little. However, if it was only a single artifact, it could only be ruthlessly suppressed by the dragon imprisoning lock. Boom! A 10-meter-long flaming saber slashed down. When the Foundation Establishment Realm disciple saw that his short-kill attack had been easily blocked by Jiang Li, and that the junior had even used a strange chain to directly seal his artifact, he immediately felt humiliated. He no longer held back and ruthlessly slashed down with his saber. However, Jiang Li seemed to be shocked silly as he stood on the spot without dodging. The moment before the blade light landed, a pitch-black color crawled all over his body. At the same time, he instantly activated the Overlord body art. Coupled with the anti-demon golden skin, hardened skin, and cool skin, it formed a thick layer of multiple defenses on Jiang Li's body. The flame blade qi was extremely strong, and Jiang Li's defense had almost reached the limit of bearing the pressure. However, in the end, he still defended against it. Swoosh! Black chains shot out from the raging flames, instantly arriving in front of the law enforcement disciple and about to completely bind him. Under Jiang Li's continuous refinement day and night, the current dragon imprisoning lock was practically equivalent to receiving the nourishment of over 100 high-grade spirit stones, and its might was already incomparable to before. Once caught by it, not to mention Foundation establishment cultivators, even core formation experts would have to kneel down and surrender. Unfortunately, Jiang Li's sneak attack still did not succeed. The dragon imprisoning lock was slashed away by numerous blade lights, and he was still able to escape defeat in the end. The flames dispersed, and Jiang Li's upper garment had already been burned to ash, revealing his pure muscles. The clothes on his lower body were protected by his spiritual qi, so they were intact. Below his feet was still the sword-shaped artifact. After losing the dragon imprisoning lock's suppression, this thing began to struggle again, trying to overturn Jiang Li and regain freedom. However, when Jiang Li wiped the cloth bag at his waist, a small rune-carving knife appeared in his hand. With sharp eyes and agile hands, he slashed at the core runes of the sword-shaped artifact ruthlessly. Under the immense brute force, the key rune was destroyed, It was as if a precise circuit had been cut off. The spiritual chi of the sword-shaped artifact was quickly lost. In a few seconds, it lay on the ground and did not move anymore. Jiang Li kicked away the sword-shaped artifact, raised his hand, and took back the dragon-imprisoning lock that was flying around while chasing after the law enforcement disciples. He then wrapped it around his hands. Crack, crack. The bones in his body rumbled as if an ancient ferocious beast had awoken from its slumber. Jiang Li stretched his waist, raised his iron fists, and charged towards his opponent. Chapter 136. Battling a Foundation Establishment Cultivator. The movement technique that Jiang Li cultivated had always existed for the sake of better controlling the speed of armored horse divine travel. Now that he used it, Jiang Li really transformed into a stream of light that pounced towards his opponent. Clang! Amidst the tearing sound, the fist wrapped in chains collided fiercely with the opponent's crimson saber. Instantly, flames erupted. Jiang Li's fist was firmly blocked by the terrifying spiritual chi saber. It poured forward with a tremendous force, but it still failed to succeed in front of the saber. His opponent was not a body cultivator, and even his foundation establishment strength was still suppressed by Jiang Li. However, not only was the other party at the foundation establishment realm, but he was also one of the top experts among the foundation establishment disciples. With the support of powerful spiritual chi, the difference in physical strength was still unable to crush the other party. Under the effect of the other party's Tao foundation and the eruption of an even higher quality spiritual chi, Jiang Li's terrifying fist force was completely nullified. Then, he waved his saber, holding Jiang Li's fist and drawing it to the side. Since this law enforcement disciple was able to enter the top 11, he naturally could not be weak. He assessed Jiang Li's punches and discovered that his move had more force than technique. His punch did not leave any room to maneuver, so he used the power diversion technique to make Jiang Li lose his center of gravity. Sure enough, with this maneuver, Jiang Li's fist immediately lost its direction, and it brushed past his side before crashing into the arena. The terrifying force of the fist plowed out a long gorge in front of him. Taking advantage of Jiang Li's unstable footing, a wisp of blade light attacked Jiang Li's back the next moment. The blade light was sharp and fierce, and once he was struck by it, he would be unable to use the defense of the Overlord body art while attacking. At that time, even with Jiang Li's physique, there would still be a hole in his back. Boom! The blade light struck the ground, and the blazing flames broke a large amount of bricks, causing the floating platform to become even more damaged. However, such a powerful strike was unable to hit Jiang Li. When the flames dissipated, Jiang Li's current figure was like a swimming snake as he twisted at an enormous angle to the side, avoiding the slash in a split second. This was the flexible joint given to him by the dragon tortoise blood tattoo. Although it was not displayed on the interface, this small ability could still play a huge role at the critical moment. Seeing that his attack did not hit, the Foundation establishment disciple raised his saber and slashed again. However, Jiang Li, who had already recovered and adjusted his state, was not afraid in the slightest. He faced the continuous blade lights and smashed out countless fist shadows. In an instant, the two clashed, resulting in a rain of metal collision sounds. The crimson saber and Jiang Li's rapidly brandishing fists were so concentrated that only afterimages could be seen. They tried to counter speed with even more speed. The explosive spiritual chi spread out like waves with the two of them as the center. The area under their feet was enduring heavy pressure as spiderweb-like cracks quickly spread out. This was originally a ring prepared for the battle between Chi Refinement Realm disciples. The quality and durability were lacking. Under the impact of the waves of higher and higher spiritual Chi, the strengthened stone slab on the surface was lifted up like a piece of paper, and next was the more fragile stone base below. This was not like a battle between a saber and a fist. It was more like two hurricanes that had met and were fighting for authority. In the battle, Jiang Li's strength was slightly stronger. The dragon imprisoning lock that was wrapped around his fists was also indestructible. However, the spiritual chi quality of Foundation Establishment Realm Disciple was even higher. As he waved his hands, saber lights and flames covered the sky and earth. For a time, the ferocious attacks were evenly matched. Swoosh! Jiang Li's fist shattered a blade light, but the shattered sharp chi still drew shallow blood traces on his face. From time to time, there would be a few stinging scratches on his body, but they would quickly disappear with the help of several healing effects. In this moment of continuous and intense attacks, Jiang Li felt an unprecedented pressure. Before the constantly dissipating Foundation Establishment spirit fire, even if Jiang Li had a certain degree of fire resistance, he was still baked by the high temperature until his mouth was dry and his hair curled. The high temperature increased the intensity of his movement. Large beads of sweat constantly appeared on his body, but they would immediately evaporate under the high temperature, only forming thick white frost on his body. While Jiang Li felt uncomfortable, the Foundation Establishment Realm Law Enforcement Disciple on the other side also felt terrible. Jiang Li's fist was so powerful that he did not expect it. The saber in his hand collided with the fist consecutively. Not only did he not gain the slightest advantage, he was instead repelled by the enormous force until his palm split open and his arm went numb. It was clearly a single-handed blade, but he was now holding it with both hands. Moreover, the soreness and numbness coming from his arms made him nearly drop the blade several times. Now, he seriously suspected that this junior brother was not human. How could a human really have such exaggerated brute force? This was different from the usual practice sparring with his fellow disciples. At this moment, both sides were already fighting seriously. If he was not careful, he might be heavily injured. At the edge of the stage, an elder was already floating in the air. If anything happened, he would immediately save them. Bang! Right at this moment, the ground beneath Jiang Li's feet suddenly collapsed. Instantly, there was a slight imbalance, causing his movements to involuntarily slow down. A gap appeared in the net of fist shadows that he was brandishing. When the law enforcement disciple saw the gap, his eyes immediately lit up. Flames wrapped around the saber, and he directly slashed at the exposed gap. Jiang Li was shocked when he saw this, yet it was already slightly too late to resist. He immediately made up his mind. As the wood armor technique covered his entire body, he circulated his overlord body art at full force. Then, he controlled the power of the armored horse divine travel together and ruthlessly collided with his opponent. The saber first came into contact with the wooden armor. Fire attribute spiritual chi was the key to subduing wood. Coupled with the fact that the quality of the wood armor technique was very low, even if Jiang Li used his spiritual chi that was higher than his cultivation level, it would still be broken in an instant. However, in this short period of time, Jiang Li's entire body suddenly seemed as if it was made of solid copper, and it became motionless. Pew! The crimson saber slashed onto Jiang Li's shoulder, and the sharp edge still broke through his skin. The scorching saber began to burn his flesh. However, the expression of that Foundation Establishment law enforcement disciple changed in an instant. His saber had only entered the flesh for an inch before it stopped moving. Under the effect of the overlord body art, Jiang Li focused all of his strength at that spot and blocked the saber. In the next moment, a cold smile appeared on Jiang Li's face. A huge momentum suddenly erupted from his feet, and his entire body shot out, directly colliding with the body of the Foundation Establishment law enforcement disciple who was a foot away. At the instant of collision, Jiang Li's body still maintained the toughness of the overlord body art. Under the collision, the figure of the law enforcement disciple's body was overlapped by Jiang Li's. He only felt that his internal organs were all shifting and entangled. Every part of his body hurt. Then he flew out. That law enforcement disciple was sent flying far away. He rolled for a long time before finally stopping. Only then did Jiang Li undo the overlord body art. He held the burning area on his shoulder, grimacing in pain. He released the chain in his hand and grabbed one end of the dragon imprisoning lock. He used it as a whip and threw it at the other party. If he did not deal the finishing blow now, when would he have another chance? However, as expected, a few saber flashes flew out and struck the dragon imprisoning lock again. The other party still had the strength to counterattack. Foundation establishment cultivators had their Dao foundation. Even if they did not cultivate their bodies were superior to Qi refinement realm disciples. When he was struck by Jiang Li, he only broke a few bones and bled a few hundred milliliters of blood. His spiritual Qi and internal breath were in chaos, and his Dao foundation was slightly damaged only. However, from the few saber Qi brandished, it was clearly much weaker than before. Jiang Li held his shoulder and walked towards him again. The effect of the golden wind jade dew was indeed astonishing. It was as if spring water filled with vitality was slowly flowing around his body. The pain in his shoulder was quickly relieved. However, the other party's saber had a high temperature and was quite vicious. It burned a large area of Jiang Li's wound, making it impossible to recover easily. Jiang Li gritted his teeth and took out a special cutting knife from his waist pocket. He sliced off the burnt flesh with a few swooshes and directly debrided himself on the spot. Although Jiang Li's body also had the pain suppression status, in order to maintain the sensitivity of his senses, the pain suppression effect was only average. As for this self-mutilation, it still hurt so much that his eyes turned red and he gritted his teeth. After the debridement, the wound on his shoulder began to quickly heal. However, the anger that Jiang Li felt because of the pain was not so easily eliminated. I have a fist technique that I would like senior brother to evaluate. The Foundation establishment law enforcement disciple was holding a long saber and coughing out blood when he saw Jiang Li walking towards him with red eyes. The internal organs in his body were still twitching from the pain, causing him to have some trauma towards this freakish junior brother. Especially Jiang Li's furious gaze. It terrified him to the point he instinctively wanted to flee. But he had just taken 2 steps back when the self-esteem in his heart forced his feet to firmly take root on the spot. He was a Foundation establishment disciple who was close to 30 years old, but Jiang Li was not even 14 years old now. He was more than double of Jiang Li's age. If he was still frightened to the point of fleeing, then how could he still stay in the law enforcement hall in the future? Most importantly, he glanced at the beautiful figures flying in the air not far from the ring. Right there, the female cultivators of the rejuvenation hall were still watching. If he were to be chased away by a junior brother in the Qi refinement realm, then his preferential rights in the sect would be completely ruined. Resisting the intense pain in his chest and abdomen, he took a deep breath and raised the crimson saber again. Come, for the dignity of the law enforcement hall, I won't lose. Jiang Li walked over step by step and wiped off a scab on his shoulder, revealing skin that was no different from other places besides being slightly pale. After his injuries were healed, a violent force once again filled his entire body. Jiang Li's figure flashed like lightning, and he let out an explosive sound as he charged towards his opponent again. His heavy fists were accumulating power, just like at the beginning of the battle. That disciple of the law enforcement hall still wanted to use the long saber to block Jiang Li's heavy fist. However, Jiang Li's fist seemed to be a deterrent and was unwilling to smash out. The gaze of the law enforcement disciple was drawn over by Jiang Li's fist, and only when it approached did he notice that Jiang Li had suddenly raised his leg and fiercely stabbed his foot forward. Could anyone explain why Jiang Li's mysterious fist technique was unleashed with his foot? Clearly, the consequence of being 1 step slower was almost fatal. Bang! Jiang Li ruthlessly kicked his foot into the abdomen. The disciple of the law enforcement hall suffered a heavy blow to his abdomen, and his entire body flew up into the air. A terrifying force penetrated his body and blasted a small hole in the clothes on his back. A moment later, his entire body transformed into a shooting star that flew out of the ring. After this heavy blow, even if the other party could still stand up, he absolutely did not have the strength to face Jiang Li again. Jiang Li heaved a sigh of relief and finally relaxed a little. This disciple of the law enforcement hall was indeed very strong. In terms of winning smoothly this time, there was indeed a portion of luck involved. If not for the other party's initial contempt, allowing Jiang Li to seize the opportunity to directly take out the other party's sword-shaped artifact, Jiang Li might have fallen into an unsightly disadvantage in this battle. If that artifact had not been damaged and had been waiting to attack covetously, this Foundation establishment's senior brother would have had the ability to fight him head-on. While the intense battle was ongoing, the artifact could suddenly attack from behind. Even Jiang Li did not have a good solution to deal with it. Or perhaps, if he had not created a second parallel mind 2 days ago, his control of his body would not have been as perfect as now. The speed at which he used the Overlord body art to form a defense would definitely decrease drastically. He would also be unable to move while defending with all his might. At the critical moment, so long as there was an extra second of delay, Jiang Li might suffer a heavy blow when he lost his balance. Not to mention counterattacking. In the situation where he did not use the Yin burial coffin, he might have already lost. On the other side, the Foundation establishment law enforcement disciple who was sent flying was caught by an elder and sent to the bottom for treatment. He had some external injuries, and after the miraculous healing by the disciples of the Rejuvenation Hall, perhaps he could try to challenge the other arenas again. As for Jiang Li, he did not have any injuries on his body, and his expenditure had only slightly exceeded the recovery rate. He only needed to take a few breaths to recover. However, in the eyes of outsiders, it was impossible for his body to be intact after fighting a Foundation establishment cultivator who had surpassed his cultivation level. Thus, a beautiful figure flew up into this messy arena, and Jiang Li received the treatment of an injured person. Jiang Li realized that the person was someone he knew. He waved his hand and greeted her, Senior Sister Qi Yu. This female cultivator from the Rejuvenation Hall was proficient in all kinds of healing techniques to begin with. When she was free, she would even give him and her hall sisters a try, and even achieve the miraculous effect of moisturizing their skin and transforming their bodies. Therefore, the fairies of the Rejuvenation Hall were all moist, soft, and gentle. If one approached them, they could smell the natural fragrance coming from their bodies. As long as a female cultivator's foundation was not bad to the point of terrorizing the heavens and earth, if they were treated like this for a few months, it would definitely be the effect of having severe beautification. On the other hand, this senior sister Qi Yu was even more outstanding, and she was on the level of being a crane in a flock of chickens amongst the female cultivators of the Rejuvenation Hall. Every time she came to the Demon Vanquishing Hall to be a referee, those fellow disciples would attack each other especially harshly. The disciples in the sect who had designs on her could definitely line up hand in hand from the entrance of the Rejuvenation Hall to the outer sect. If not for the fact that this body of his was born a few years later, Jiang Li might have lost more than 10 kilograms of weight because of her. Junior brother Jiang Li, well done. Are you injured anywhere? Senior sister promises to make you lively and healthy. Senior sister Qi Yu surrounded Jiang Li's bare upper body and rubbed it left and right. That gentle smile made Jiang Li's kidneys involuntarily twitch twice. He hurriedly tightened his belt, having almost become full of vigor. Cough, cough, senior sister, do you have water? I'm dying of thirst. Jiang Li shifted his attention. He was really thirsty. This was the bad thing about fighting with fire attribute spiritual roots cultivators. When one was hot, it was easy to sweat. If one fought for a longer time, they might be roasted dry. Are you really not injured? Senior sister saw you get slashed just now. Senior sister Qi Yu handed a bottle of spirit spring water to Jiang Li, and then she went forward to check Jiang Li's shoulder. In the place where he should have been injured, she only found a faint line that could barely be seen in the bright light. She looked all over his body again, but she did not find any wounds. For a moment, there was actually no place for her to use her skills. In the end, senior sister Qi Yu could only use a cleansing technique on Jiang Li. The cool water attribute spiritual qi washed over Jiang Li's body. In a short few seconds, it cleaned all the stains and salt crystals on his body. Jiang Li even felt a stream of spiritual qi enter his mouth and nose and spin around, helping him brush his teeth. Affected by the cleansing technique, added status, body cleaning. Body cleaning, clean away dust, oil, colored spots, blood, and other 99 stubborn stains. Ensure that both the skin and clothes are clean. Duration, 5 seconds minus plus. Under the effect of the cleansing technique, Jiang Li's body seemed to have been rubbed in the bathhouse for 2 hours, becoming clean and relaxed. However, Jiang Li looked at that status and fell into deep thought. Senior sister Qi Yu, can you use more spiritual qi to give me the strongest cleansing technique you know? Chapter 137, Following in her footsteps. In the long, clear hall, an elder sighed to himself. He really defeated a Foundation establishment disciple, and it's that disciple of Elder Zhu. The other sect elders could not help nodding in wonder when they heard this. He won against a Foundation establishment cultivator at the Qi refinement realm, and I don't see many injuries on his body. This kid really has a strong body. A body forged from body refinement can actually suppress the Tao Foundation. This is unprecedented. There's also that chain. Its grade isn't low. Elder, he really invested a lot in this disciple. That's true. If such a disciple were to be given to me, I would be willing to pay a huge price as well. After seeing Jiang Li's first battle in the Sky Arena, it would be a lie to say that they were not surprised. In the process of a cultivator's cultivation, every single realm represented a transformation of the body, and there was naturally a huge gap between it and the previous realm. Wanting to cross realms to challenge others was definitely not as simple as just saying it. Amongst the elders, the most smug person present was Jiang Li's master, the burly Elder He. They saw Elder He walking towards the elder with a grim expression on his face. Oh my, look at what happened. Junior brother Zhu, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. How did my disciple injure your disciple? Although Elder He said that he was sorry, his mouth was already grinning from ear to ear. Anyone who saw this would wish to punch him in the face. He glanced and winked at Elder Zhu of the Law Enforcement Hall, causing the other party's face to turn green and white. The two of them nearly brawled on the spot. However, none of the other elders stopped them. All of them held back their laughter as they watched the two of them tear each other apart. Over the past hundreds of years, these two had always been like this. If they stopped fighting, everyone would find it strange. Among the 12 inner sect head elders of the Scripture Storage Valley, including the Valley Master, Taoist Wuxia, none of them were fellow disciples under a certain master. In fact, when they were young, they did not even know each other. These 12 head elders were basically all people who had experienced the establishment of the Scripture Storage Valley back then. They were members of the Rogue Cultivator Alliance. After that period, they understood the importance of unity better than anyone else. After all, the Scripture Storage Valley was a sect that was born from rogue cultivators. They could not have the master and disciple relationship of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, where the 5 elements supported each other. They were not from a clan like the 100 Tempering Mountain, who were related by marriage for generations. Even Benevolent Travel Temple had a common faith and belief that they could not abandon. However, there was nothing in the Scripture Storage Valley at that time. There were many internal conflicts, and some rogue cultivators even had deep grudges. At that time, other than the powerful guidance of the 11 founders, the reason why they stood together was because of external pressure. It could be said that without the bullying of the other 3 sects back then, there would not be the Scripture Storage Valley of today. Therefore, at the location where the Scripture Storage Valley was successfully established, the founders set this rule. The 12 head elders of the inner sect of the Scripture Storage Valley had to set an example by supporting each other. They addressed each other as senior and junior brothers in order to achieve success and lead the sect to greater unity. After more than 200 years, what they had done was indeed quite good. Apart from the outer sect disciples that they could not take care of, although inner sect disciples did not love each other, there were rarely any conflicts between them. Therefore, although it was a joke, the disciple of Elder Zhu was defeated by a Qi refinement realm cultivator was a little shameful, but that was all. In their eyes, most of them still believed that the Foundation establishment disciple had lost to the beast blood diagram, not Jiang Li. However, it seemed to be the truth. If he did not have the 4 blood tattoos of the beast blood diagram, Jiang Li was far from being his opponent's match. An ancient inheritance that was compatible with one's body would definitely bring about a huge bonus to a cultivator. Although Jiang Li's performance was a little exaggerated, it was still within the scope of understanding. After all, the previous genius, Chu Yunxuan, had already crushed their world view once in front of their eyes, causing their acceptance threshold for the concept of a genius to greatly increase. Junior brother He, junior brother Zhu, don't mess around. It's our fortune to have such a disciple appear in the sect. Junior brother He, you should still continue to teach him well in the future. As the Valley Master, Taoist Wush stepped forward and said a few words before the two of them stopped. They looked at the floating, stage again. The ruined platform was covered in cracks, as if one stomp could send it back to the ground. The strongest cleansing technique. Junior brother Jiang Li, are you still not feeling well? If I just use the cleansing technique, no amount of spiritual qi can treat your injuries. When senior sister Qi Yu heard Jiang Li's request, she was very puzzled. With the cleansing technique, even a pig would become a clean pig. If she used more spiritual qi, she would probably be able to wash someone until their skin peeled. It's like this, senior sister. I seem to have gotten some poison on my body just now. I'm afraid that I haven't gotten rid of it completely, so I wanted to get your help to feel at ease. Jiang Li thought for a moment and came up with a reason. Senior sister, Qi Yu frowned tightly when she heard this, and she seemed to be slightly angry. That guy actually dared to poison you, junior brother. Don't worry. Senior sister will help you teach him a lesson later. After Jiang Li mourned for that senior brother for 3 seconds, he stood obediently on the spot. A moment later, a stream of water attribute spiritual qi struck Jiang Li's body again. If it was said that he was bathing in the mud just now, then Jiang Li had walked into the car wash store and let the strongest worker in the store wash him like a car. The status had also changed from the original body cleaning to the more effective body cleaning. As usual, Jiang Li pressed the plus button to keep this status permanently. Qi Yu left after completing the mission, leaving behind Jiang Li, who had put on his disciple uniform again. He stood on the platform alone and observed the battles between the other 10 Foundation establishment disciples. He would continue to challenge them later. For the reward promised by Elder He had to choose one of the 5 floating stages to occupy. As he looked at the spiritual qi fluctuation that seeped out from the 5 combat rings, Jiang Li was calculating in his heart which one he had the greatest chance of winning against. At this moment, a sandstorm seemed to have blown up on an arena, and dust covered the entire area. After a while, a human-shaped statue was pushed out from above. After flying into the air, the statue's outer shell collapsed, revealing a familiar burly figure. Jiang Li slapped his forehead and was slightly speechless. This was a senior brother under Elder He. Obviously, he had followed in senior sister Liu Mulan's footsteps. Chapter 138, Overcoming the Earth Dust Scripture. When he saw his senior brother being blasted out of the arena, Jiang Li rode the dragon imprisoning lock forward to greet him. Senior brother Liu Bai, how are you? After helping the other party up in the air, he and senior brother Liu Bai flew back to the A stage. While letting him rest, he received the treatment of the Rejuvenation Hall's disciple. Sai, I'm fine. Senior brother Liu Bai had a dejected look on his face, appearing rather regretful of his loss this time. Junior brother Jiang Li, shouldn't you be in the arena below? Why have you flown here? After being depressed for a long time, senior brother Liu Bai suddenly noticed that the person speaking to him was his junior brother, Jiang Li, who was at the Qi refinement realm. Jiang Li did not conceal it. After all, this was something that everyone knew. It was only because senior brother Liu Bai and the others were in an intense battle earlier and were too busy to pay attention to it that they did not notice it. After he roughly explained the situation, senior brother Liu Bai had a stunned expression as well. After staring blankly for a long time, he became even more depressed. I originally thought that junior brother would still need a few years to catch up to us. I didn't expect you to be here so soon. The matter of Jiang Li being arranged to fight with the Foundation establishment disciples seemed to have a greater impact on senior brother Liu Bai than losing to Shen Ruoshi. It was as if he was a top student in high school and had lost to another straight-A student in the next class during a midterm examination. This made him unhappy, but it was also normal. However, when he returned home with the result, he discovered that his cousin was a guest at home. He graduated from high school at the age of 8 and studied his master's degree at the age of 10. At the age of 13, he was already a Nobel Prize winner. That was the feeling. Jiang Li comforted him. Senior brother Liu Bai was actually just like senior sister Liu Mulan from before, and he was not injured at all. As long as he took a short break, he would be able to issue another challenge. In fact, he still had a chance of entering the top 5. However, for some reason, the other party's mood was constantly low. However, senior brother Liu Bai, that earth dust scripture is so effective against us body cultivators. Why do you still want to challenge her? Jiang Li asked after thinking about it. He was still puzzled by this. Because I didn't challenge her. It was Shen Ruoshi who kept chasing after me. Jiang Li was speechless. Although it was understandable to challenge an opponent that she was good against, it still felt like bullying. I don't want to fight you, but you are not letting me go. On the 5 floating stages of the Foundation establishment realm, the result of 3 of the stages had already been decided. They were respectively the 1st, 3rd, and 4th rings. Among them, there was a senior brother from the Alchemy Hall on the 4th ring. He seemed to have grasped a blue spirit fire of heaven and earth that was extremely scorching when burning. The person fighting with him might have a higher cultivation level and stronger Tao technique, but he could not withstand the power of the spirit fire and was eventually forced out of the arena. On the 3rd combat ring was a beautiful young lady with a smile on her face. She was the Heaven and Earth Hall's Shen Ruoshi that Jiang Li had seen defeat Jiang Li's senior brother and sister in succession. After the battle with senior brother Liu Bai, the entire 3rd ring was already covered in problematic dust. As long as the challenger stepped onto the ring, it was equivalent to directly stepping into a trap, and it was a very troublesome character to deal with. On the 1st stage stood another disciple from the Heaven and Earth Hall. The Sect's Heaven and Earth Hall had a collection of the best geniuses in the entire scripture storage valley. Unlike the other halls, the Heaven and Earth Hall itself existed to nurture experts and cultivate the future pillars of the sect. Naturally, they produced the most outstanding disciples. However, this senior brother's expression was gentle, and his demeanor, as well as his every move, looked like a lower-quality version of Chu Yunxuan. Even his combat style was extremely similar to the eldest senior brother. He used things to smash people, but what he held in his hand was not a golden seal, but a small mountain peak that seemed to be an ornament. This imitation could not be said to be similar, but nearly identical. This person was not normal. For some reason, Jiang Li instinctively had this feeling when he looked at him. Jiang Li stared at the other party, who seemed to have noticed his gaze as well. He turned around and met Jiang Li's gaze. The two of them looked into each other's eyes, and then they revealed a warm smile at the same time, nodding towards each other. After turning their heads, they sneered in their hearts at the same time. HMPH, that guy really acts well. Due to the restrictions of the rules, after each battle, the ring that had been challenged would have the right to stop fighting for 2 hours. That was for the disciples after the battle to meditate and recover from their injuries. Jiang Li and senior brother Liu Bai meditated on the stage together. Of course, to Jiang Li, who had recovered his spiritual qi long ago, this was only an act. In his mind, he studied the possible tactics he could use with the parallel mind. 2 hours passed quickly. Jiang Li stood up while senior brother Li Bai, who was by his side, was still immersed in regulating his breathing and was unable to free himself. It seemed that he had indeed exhausted a great deal of his strength in the battle earlier. The dragon imprisoning lock on his body emitted a crisp sound as Jiang Li slowly flew towards one of the 5 stages. Thump thump. When his feet landed on the platform, Jiang Li could clearly feel that the texture of the platform below his feet was obviously much tougher than the Qi Refinement Realm stage. Senior Sister Shen, I am Jiang Li of the Demon Vanquishing Hall. Please enlighten me. Jiang Li cupped his hands. The person standing opposite him was the disciple of the Heaven and Earth Hall, Shen Ruoshi, who had defeated 2 Foundation Establishment Realm cultivators in succession. This Jiang Li actually wants to challenge little Ruoshi. In the long, clear hall, the group of elders who were watching the show felt very surprised. This was especially true for the Valley Master, Taoist Wush, and Elder He, the head elder of the Demon Vanquishing Hall. The 2 people standing opposite them were both the youngest disciples under their wing. They were looking forward to the outcome of this battle. However, Jiang Li's choice was very confusing to others. It was obvious that Shen Ruoshi's Earth Dust Scripture was an ancient technique that could restrain body cultivators. It was powerful and unpredictable. Facing such an enemy, the best way was to use long-range spell techniques to probe them and not let them be tainted by the dust. As a result, body cultivators who only knew how to engage in close combat were always restrained. As for Jiang Li, the elders had watched him fight until now, and they were already quite familiar with his stubbornness. There was no denying that he was a genius in body cultivation. In terms of Tao techniques, it was true that he could already be considered outstanding, and the strength of his spiritual qi was also impressive among the Qi Refinement Realm disciples. However, compared to Foundation Establishment cultivators, there was clearly no comparison. Did he have some sort of special confidence when he chose to challenge Shen Ruoshi? Or did he find some flaws in the Earth Dust Scripture from the perspective of a third party? On the other hand, Shen Ruoshi could not understand why a Qi Refinement Realm disciple came up to challenge her. Jiang Li could only explain the reason again, before the other party reluctantly accepted reality. Junior brother Jiang Li is also a body cultivator. After getting an affirmative answer, Shen Ruoshi covered her mouth again. She looked surprised. If I remember correctly, your 2 senior brother and sister lost to me. Since you are a body cultivator, why did you choose to challenge me? Could it be that junior brother wants to avenge them? Shen Ruoshi could not understand. No, senior sister misunderstood. Senior sister Shen is beautiful and kind-hearted. You didn't even injure the 2 seniors earlier, so I won't be so ungrateful. Jiang Li waved his hand repeatedly and immediately praised, causing the other party's smiling eyes to narrow even more. What he said was the truth. After the battle, senior sister Liu Mulan and senior brother Liu Bai did not have many injuries on their bodies. The other party clearly showed mercy. If they still wanted to seek revenge shamelessly, it would not make sense. It's just that the path of body cultivation is a straightforward path. If you choose to blindly escape after discovering your deficiencies, then the restrictions you encounter in your future cultivation will definitely increase. Therefore, I am determined to succeed in challenging senior sister. This junior brother is reckless and stubborn. Senior sister, please be gentler with me. As Jiang Li spoke, everyone who heard his words nodded successively. They sighed in their minds and felt that this kid would definitely become great in the future with such a character. Since junior brother has said so, please go ahead. The gong sounded, and the battle began. At this instant, Jiang Li felt the atmosphere on the arena suddenly change. A thin layer of dust that almost covered the entire ring started to jump and float, as if it had a life of its own. The dust around Jiang Li's feet was like iron sand that was attracted by a magnet, and it gathered around Jiang Li's feet. If one was surrounded by this dust, their feet would become heavier and slower. However, if he wanted to find a place to hide, there was no safe place to stay in the entire ring. Jiang Li did not float in the air, allowing the fine dust to stick to his shoes and pants. However, at the next moment, this thin layer of dust was washed away by an invisible force. Every tiny dust was washed clean. The surrounding dust continued to stick to him, but it was continuously washed away by the invisible force. As this happened, not a single dust could stay on Jiang Li's body for even a second. Jiang Li was delighted in his heart. He had made the right guess. To achieve such an effect, it was naturally the status that Jiang Li had just obtained. This was the magical effect of effective body cleaning. This powerful cleaning effect came from senior sister Qi Yu's full-powered cleansing technique. Compared to the ordinary body cleaning, this effective body cleaning could not only remove the foreign stains on his body, but it could also remove some tracking sense and spiritual qi objects. For example, the dust that contained the spiritual qi of the earth dust scripture was within its targeted group. This was the same as having a foundation establishment cultivator beside Jiang Li at all times, using a full-powered body cleaning technique on him every 5 seconds. It was difficult for the dust to stay on him. Jiang Li did not have to worry about the troublesome dust for the time being. He immediately kicked his feet and drew a straight line on the arena. Then, he punched senior sister Shen Ruoshi in the chest. Shen Ruoshi did not dodge or resist. She let Jiang Li's fist land on her body. However, Jiang Li's heavy fist seemed to have landed on a pile of ash. It passed through his chest without any obstruction. In the next moment, her delicate figure transformed into a cloud of dust that enveloped Jiang Li. Huff! A gust of cold wind from the yin wind art that did not care about spiritual qi expenditure blew away the dust. Jiang Li's body was still dyed a layer of gray. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Every second, a layer of dust would be brushed off from Jiang Li's body. He did not need to worry at all. After a few seconds, his body would become spotless again. Junior brother Jiang Li, you asked me to be gentler, but your punch was so heavy. The dust that was blown away gathered in the distance. When it dispersed again, Shen Ruoshi appeared there unscathed. She patted her chest as if she was really afraid. Senior sister's earth dust scripture is unfathomable. How can I injure you? Don't make fun of me. As Jiang Li spoke, he continued to rush towards the other party. This time, he raised his leg and swept the other party into 2 segments. Then, he watched helplessly as the other party turned into dust. Jiang Li had long known that this move of his would not have any effect. It was just that he did not use much strength. However, the moment the attack struck the other party, he observed any abnormalities in his surroundings with all his might, trying to find out where the other party's true body was. In the end, he found nothing. Shen Ruoshi appeared again. Jiang Li threw the dragon imprisoning lock at her. He wanted to use the dragon imprisoning lock to suppress her spiritual qi so that she could not use it. However, the moment the chains tightened, the other party was still turned into dust. At this point, even the dragon imprisoning lock was also covered in thick dust, not giving him any chance at all. Jiang Li pursed his lips and put away the dragon imprisoning lock. Not only could this dust suppress the strength of cultivators, but it could also weaken the might of artifacts. How troublesome! Even though he had successfully removed the other party's dust from his body, he was still caught in a bitter struggle. However, Jiang Li was not discouraged. He put the dragon imprisoning lock back on his waist. He punched and kicked Shen Ruoshi into dust repeatedly as she appeared time and again. He believed that all spell techniques had to consume spiritual qi. It was obvious that most of the dust was prepared by the other party in advance. as Shen Ryuoshi could not have enough spiritual qi to make them on the spot. However, the amount of dust that she had prepared beforehand would definitely be limited without any spatial equipment. Moreover, no matter how little it consumed to control them, there would definitely be some expenditure. As long as it continued, Jiang Li did not believe that the other party's stamina could still compare to his. Jiang Li shuttled through the flying dust without any fear. He ignored the dust that stuck to him and blasted the other party's body apart one after another. From time to time, he would use the yin wind art to blow the dust away from the ring. Every time he did that, Shen Ryuoshi had no choice but to recall the dust. He was doing everything he could to increase her spiritual qi consumption. It would be the biggest joke in the world if a qi refinement realm disciple wanted to bring down a foundation establishment realm disciple. However, when it came to Jiang Li, everything was not absolute. In next to no time, Jiang Li noticed that the speed at which his opponent's body reconstituted had started to slow down. It was probably because the expenditure of spiritual qi had increased, causing her to feel strained. Shen Ryuoshi was not a fool. She saw that Jiang Li was still lively despite being in her territory. There was definitely something fishy about him. Initially, she had planned to win with this invincible technique, but now that her plan had been foiled, she started to panic. She took the initiative to gather a large amount of floating dust, forming a few earth currents that rushed towards Jiang Li, attempting to directly cover him into a statue. However, in her previous battles, the reason why she did not do so immediately was because she had always used fine dust to weaken her opponent before controlling large amounts of dust to cover them. It was not because she did not want to, but because she could not. The speed at which the gathered dirt flowed in the air was truly slow, and Jiang Li's swift movement technique easily dodged it before he shattered the head with a punch. Without weakening or restricting the opponent ahead of time, it would be difficult for the dust to catch up to cultivators who were focused on avoiding them. Why aren't you afraid of my turbid air heavy earth? Shen Ryuoshi could not retain her smile any longer. How could a qi refinement realm disciple crack her turbid air heavy earth? That was the core chapter of the earth dust scripture. How could it be easily unraveled by a disciple? She could not help but ask Jiang Li anxiously. When she asked this question, she originally did not think that Jiang Li could answer, but she did not expect that Jiang Li would actually say the truth about his countermeasure against the earth dust scripture. Jiang Li did not answer directly but asked first, "Senior sister actually can't control all the dust, right?" The other hesitated for a moment, then nodded in acknowledgement. Jiang Li thought to himself that it was indeed the case. Even he, who cultivated the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, progressed slowly in the aspect of spirit refinement. It was impossible for the other party to possess a high mind attribute. She would definitely not be able to control this turbid air heavy earth in a large area. But so what? What does this have to do with you being able to overcome the earth dust scripture? Shen Ryuoshi still looked confused. The earth dust scripture was such a powerful technique. Even if she did not control it in detail, as long as the enemy entered the range, they would still be attacked. This was a trait that she had tested time and again. In the past, it had never lost its effectiveness in battle. She definitely could not be wrong. That's exactly why. You'll understand when you see it, senior sister. Jiang Li took out 2 talismans from his bosom. After pouring a large amount of spiritual qi into them, he threw them towards a stream of dust floating in the air. The 2 talismans pierced through the dust flow, but after passing through the dust flow, the 2 talismans were covered in a thick layer of dust, and then they lost all their strength and fell to the ground. Senior sister's turbid air heavy earth will be attracted by objects with spiritual qi and will automatically stick to them. Am I right? Jiang Li had discovered this matter from the dragon imprisoning lock. At that time, after it swept through the dust, it was covered in a thick layer of dust. After that, Jiang Li had some guesses about this. He had secretly tried it during the process of the battle, and he quickly verified this guess. Although he himself did not use the characteristics of turbid air heavy earth to overcome it. Using it as an excuse was completely reasonable. As for whether this would cause problems for them later, it was none of his business. I'm a body cultivator, so I don't really rely on spiritual qi. As long as I don't use spiritual qi myself and use other sources of spiritual qi to lure them, I can naturally avoid getting tainted by the dust. Jiang Li explained a lot of things that he had just thought of. Shen Ruoshi and the elders of the long, clear hall came to a realization. So that was the reason. As long as he did not use spiritual qi, he could overcome the earth-dust scripture. Wait, not using spiritual qi. How could they fight without it? Even body cultivators had to infuse their bodies with spiritual qi. Body cultivators only used their bodies to fight, but it was not to say that they did not rely on spiritual qi. If they threw aside spiritual qi, even if they could still fight, their attributes would be greatly reduced. It would be a blessing if they could unleash 40–50% of their strength. Only a freak like Jiang Li could maintain considerable combat strength without using spiritual qi. Moreover, the earth-dust scripture's turbid air heavy earth could be controlled by a cultivator's will. Shen Ruoshi had this limitation only because she had not reached the higher levels of the cultivation method. If she was given 2 more years, this method would be completely useless to her. At that time, if he still plunged into the turbid air heavy earth, he would only suffer a crushing defeat. So when they thought about it carefully, the method Jiang Li spoke of was actually very limited. He did not overcome the earth-dust scripture. He only unraveled the earth-dust scripture that Shen Ruoshi used. Moreover, he was not even close to overcoming it. At the very least, Jiang Li was still unable to see through Shen Ruoshi's actual body. With this in mind, they subconsciously heaved a sigh of relief. If the sect's ultimate technique was broken just like that, it would be a huge problem. Chapter 139. You've already lost. I see. Indeed, Shen Ruoshi had not used the earth-dust scripture against a mortal. In the past, the opponents she faced were either demon beasts or cultivators, which one of them did not carry spiritual qi. She did not expect that someone would use this trait to avoid being affected. However, after hearing this, she gradually calmed down. Just now, she was only a little nervous because of the earth-dust scripture's failure. In her heart, the earth-dust scripture was simply a supreme holy scripture, so when she discovered that it was not so absolutely powerful, she lost her composure. However, even though she was unable to take down Jiang Li until now, this junior brother of hers was unable to do anything to her. Before her spiritual qi was exhausted, it was not time to admit defeat. Junior brother Jiang Li, thank you for answering my questions. However, I'll still do my best from now on. Shen Ruoshi adjusted her mood as her expression became serious. If someone familiar with her saw this, they would be shocked. Shen Ruoshi, who was always smiling, had actually shown such an expression. She formed hand seals and released the spiritual qi that even Jiang Li could clearly sense from her body. Clearly, she was preparing a powerful spell technique. Jiang Li immediately rushed forward and threw a punch. There was no surprise, it was still dust that scattered. However, what surprised Jiang Li was that he was actually unable to interrupt his opponent's casting. What was up with this earth-dust scripture's escape technique? Was it really invincible? If not for the fact that Jiang Li did not have an earth attribute spiritual root and could not cultivate the earth-dust scripture, he would have turned around and entered the heaven and earth hall. If he could use such a strange escape technique, and coupled with his perpetual motion machine characteristics, he could at least wander around the great mountain region safely. Unfortunately, this was fate. Jiang Li, who possessed the beast blood diagram, was still jealous of other people's cultivation methods and secret techniques. He shattered the other party's body a few more times, but it still did not have any effect. The floating dust cloud also slowly changed. Dust gathered together and formed small pieces. Soon, a dirt ball formed in the dust. As it continued to gather, the dirt ball grew larger and larger. Finally, The 5 balls of dust formed 5 long earthen yellow spikes in the air that looked like they were made of rocks. Looking at this situation, Jiang Li roughly understood the other party's thoughts. Since she did not have enough mental power to control the dust in a large area, she would gather them together. She would move them in the same direction and control them like a piece of artifact. From countless free particles to 5 complete earth spikes, wouldn't the difficulty of controlling them drop drastically? Senior sister, no need to hold back. I'll also use my full strength. Jiang Li's expression became very serious as he looked at the 5 floating earth spikes. The thick and heavy spiritual qi emanating from them was really frightening. The turbid air heavy earth refined by the earth dust scripture was absolutely not ordinary. A single dust particle was weak and powerless, and it could not even injure a mortal or even tear a piece of paper. However, countless specks of dust gathered together, and countless tiny forces pushed in the same direction. The power produced would definitely be terrifying to the point of being unable to resist. A clay ball the size of a marble could easily pierce through 10 mortal heavy armor, and these 5 earth spikes were all as thick as a wrist and 30 centimeters long. This was the Heaven and Earth Hall's cultivator, Shen Ruoshi. She had cultivated the earth dust scripture for more than 10 years to accumulate the turbid air heavy earth. Once she unleashed it, the power would definitely be extraordinary. Whoosh boom! Jiang Li's figure instantly appeared tens of meters away. On his face, there was a bloody scratch. Something brushed past the skin as wide as a finger's length and half a centimeter of flesh below the skin. Jiang Li's tough skin was actually unable to resist this kind of attack at all. This made Jiang Li, who always used defense to bully others, feel extremely uncomfortable. He looked at the spot where he had originally stood. After the dust settled, a hole the thickness of a wrist appeared there. With Jiang Li's hearing, he could even hear the sound of wind coming from the hole. His heart beat wildly a few times. The power of that earth spike just now actually directly pierced through the platform. What an exaggerated attack. Jiang Li thought to himself that it was a close call. Fortunately, he was not careless and dodged in time. Otherwise, he would have fallen to the ground and lost after the previous strike. But it was not yet time to be relieved. The remaining 4 spikes turned and pointed at him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Jiang Li tapped the ground with his foot, and his figure instantly vanished on the spot. With a speed that he could currently control, he moved at an irregularly high speed on the combat arena. No matter how strong the attack was, as long as it did not hit someone, it was useless. Bang! He shattered his opponent's body with another punch. However, Jiang Li noticed that the dust that erupted from the other party's body was far less delicate than before. The earth attribute spiritual qi contained in it was also far weaker than before. Clearly, according to the degree of refinement and nurturing, the turbid air-heavy earth was also divided into grades. The most powerful core portion had already been drawn out to form the 5 earth spikes. Whoosh boom! As soon as Jiang Li swung his fist, another earth spike suddenly shot down. Sparks flew as hole was formed in the specially reinforced foundation establishment stage after the earth spike penetrated it. The earth spike brushed past Jiang Li's waist, colliding with the dragon imprisoning lock around his waist. With just this collision, Jiang Li's waist seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. He suddenly felt a pain and was sent flying over 100 meters away, almost falling off the stage. Jiang Li rolled over and stood up. He did not dare to stay any longer and quickly left the spot, continuing to run at high speed. Even with Jiang Li's terrifying speed, as long as he paused for a moment, he would be caught and attacked. This time, he did not dare to be careless. His body moved like a bolt of lightning, and his actual body could not be seen. Not far away, Shen Ruoshi appeared again. However, she looked exhausted. It was obvious that the 2 spikes were a huge drain on her. Moreover, the 2 earth spikes that had already shot out did not appear again. It seemed that it was a one-time use attack that could instantly erupt the spiritual qi accumulated in the dust. Although it was powerful, she would lose a large amount of turbid air heavy earth. Even if she won in the end, she would suffer a heavy loss, and her combat strength would be greatly reduced. Moreover, judging from her current state, even if she was given more turbid air heavy earth, Shen Ryuoshi would not have enough spiritual qi to condense more earth spikes. Swoosh! As he ran, the dragon imprisoning lock on Jiang Li's waist flew out and swept towards the 3 earth spikes in the sky, attempting to destroy the dangerous spikes directly. Boom! Before the dragon imprisoning lock could touch them, an earth spike was forced to change targets and strike the dragon imprisoning lock. The thick, pitch-black chain was struck so hard that it fell to the ground. With the toughness of the dragon imprisoning lock, it was naturally not damaged. However, its body was already covered in dust that had yet to be cleaned. When it smashed onto the ground, the surrounding inferior-grade dust swarmed over, wrapping the dragon imprisoning lock tightly. As a result, it could not break free in a short period of time. Jiang Li was slightly helpless. His dragon imprisoning lock had actually only taken down one of the other party's earth spikes. This was truly a little too disappointing. However, there were still 2 earth spikes left. As long as he dealt with them, Jiang Li would definitely win this battle. While Jiang Li was running, he looked at Shen Ryuoshi, who was still standing in the middle of the ring. The other party's face had long lost its calm. Her face was pale as paper and sweat poured down like rain. From the looks of it, she was definitely an arrow at the end of its flight. She was unlike Jiang Li, who had a large amount of spiritual qi flowing out from his body at all times, allowing him to maintain his peak condition. Shen Ryuoshi had already used the earth dust scripture twice in a row on a large scale. She was also affected by Jiang Li and had exhausted a lot of her spiritual qi. Even a foundation establishment cultivator could not withstand such a battle of attrition. These 5 earth spikes were her last bit of stubbornness. If she could not hit Jiang Li, then her remaining spiritual qi would not even be able to maintain the earth dust escape technique. Thus, all of her hopes for victory rested on these last 2 earth spikes. However, Jiang Li still had other methods. As he ran, he muttered incantations while his hands formed a few simple wood attribute seals. In the scripture storage valley, it was not a profound spell technique. However, after combining it with one of the wood attribute secret techniques of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, it could become extremely powerful, turning something useless into something magical. He ran around Shen Ryuoshi at high speed. When the other party could not grasp his movements, he released a large amount of wood attribute spiritual qi to the outside world. On the entire stage, there was something stirring. In the long, clear hall, Taoist Wuxia shook his head and said with a smile, "Little Ryuoshi is going to lose." Even he had not expected this to happen. Most of the surrounding elders did not know why the Valley Master said this. Clearly, there were still 2 earth spikes left, and it was hard to say who would win. How did he come to such a conclusion? Only the few head elders standing beside the Valley Master nodded. Clearly, they also saw some subtle things. At that moment, there was a flash of vitality under Shen Ryuoshi's feet. Something moved under her feet and raised it up. Shen Ryuoshi was shocked. She thought that she had fallen into a trap and wanted to escape. However, what surprised her even more was that the earth dust escape technique, which had always been successful, actually failed at this moment. How was this possible? No, it was the layer of azure light beneath her feet that blocked the escape technique. She started to panic, then calmed herself. Shen Ryuoshi wanted to run to the side immediately, thinking of leaving the area covered by the wood attribute spiritual qi. Speaking of which, this was the first time she had moved on her feet since participating in the sect martial arts competition. However, after running a few steps, she discovered that the entire arena had unknowingly been covered by a layer of azure light. She actually had no place to stand. When the green light dissipated, Shen Ryuoshi finally saw what the soft thing all over the stage was. This was moss. This thing that suddenly grew out and covered the entire arena was moss. It was the moss that Jiang Li had created with his wood attribute spell technique. Previously, when the battle had just begun, the turbid air-heavy earth was still in the dust form, and the entire arena was floating. Jiang Li rampaged in the dust clouds. Apart from consuming the other party's spiritual qi, it was not as if he did not do anything. Quietly, he scattered a large number of plant spores and seeds on the ground. Most of them were this type of desolation moss. It was said that this tenacious plant could even cover the area of the desert. Under the nourishment of Jiang Li's spell technique and the rapid provision of spiritual qi, it covered the entire arena. Jiang Li did not know the profundity of his opponent's escape technique, but the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth complemented and countered each other. Jiang Li also knew a little common sense. When executing the 5 elements escape technique, one had to rely on the power of the 5 elements. Generally speaking, earth escape had to come into contact with earth and water. Wood attribute spell techniques happened to be something that countered earth attribute spell techniques. Ordinary moss naturally could not isolate escape techniques. However, when the moss on the ground was filled with Jiang Li's wood attribute spiritual qi, even foundation establishment cultivators would encounter considerable obstruction if they wanted to escape through the ground. Perhaps it would only take a few seconds for the other party to tear apart the moss and escape again. However, with Jiang Li's speed, 1 second was enough to do many things. He crossed dozens of meters and appeared in front of Shen Ruoshi in an instant. He held a spell in his hand and wanted to restrain the other party. Slam! The talisman landed on Shen Ruoshi's shoulder. A large amount of ink climbed out of the talisman and spread all over her body. It was going to bind her completely. This was the spirit-locking talisman that Jiang Li had spent a lot of spirit stones to purchase. Once it was pasted on, even foundation establishment cultivators would not be able to easily break free. Although Jiang Li had an even more useful dragon imprisoning lock on him, it was his main combat artifact and had to be used at all times. Naturally, he could not use it to tie people or demonic beasts for a long time. Therefore, he bought this talisman paper to replace the dragon imprisoning lock to restrain the opponent. In the sect martial arts competition, it was not a life-and-death battle after all. If he were to punch his senior sister, it was clearly not appropriate to hit her in the face or chest. She was also the disciple of the Valley Master. He was afraid that if he went overboard, he would be asked to be responsible for his senior sister forever. Then, what about his freedom? Thus, Jiang Li simply used the talisman paper to end this battle. However, right at this moment, an earthen yellow stream of light instantly arrived. The light flashed past his eyes and went through Shen Ruoshi's shoulder, tearing the talisman. Subsequently, the aftershock did not stop at all. Jiang Li felt a chill on his left thigh and was directly pierced by the earth spike. Immediately after, it pierced through the ring behind him. Only then did the earth spike exhaust all its strength. As it fell, it scattered into dust. Shen Ruoshi's shoulder was badly injured. She fell forward and hit Jiang Li. The two of them slid back far away. A long line of blood was drawn on the ground. Jiang Li's thigh was numb at first. After the numbness slowly dissipated, it became the terrifying pain of having his flesh cut out from his leg. He gritted his teeth and controlled himself. Only then did he not spit out curses like "damn" out loud. Shen Ruoshi, who was pressing against Jiang Li, was also trembling because of the pain. Warm blood flowed out of the wound on her shoulder and drenched Jiang Li's clothes. Jiang Li smiled bitterly in his heart. He had been careless. He had not expected his senior sister to be so ruthless. Jiang Li did not attack in a random direction. At that time he, Shen Ruoshi, and the two earth spikes overlapped. Shen Ruoshi was in the middle, so she blocked Jiang Li's from the earth spike's direction of attack. Only then did he dare to rush up and subdue the other party. However, no one had imagined that an internal sect battle would actually result in such an attack that would cause mutual injuries to the user and target. It had truly exceeded Jiang Li's expectations, and this caused him to suffer this ruthless strike without much preparation. At this moment, Shen Ruoshi, who was lying on Jiang Li's body, moved. She forced herself not to faint from the pain and supported herself with her other hand as she spoke with trembling lips. "Your leg is injured. You can't run. I still have an earth spike left. Junior brother, admit defeat." Shen Ruoshi had to pause for a moment before she could finish her sentence. The last earth spike had already floated above their heads. With a thought, she could instantly activate it. Jiang Li really wanted to tell her that he could tear her apart more than 10 times, while she was talking to a body cultivator at such a close distance. However, Jiang Li still did not do that. He only raised his finger and pointed at the floating earth spike, shattering his opponent's last hope. "No, senior sister, you've already lost." As soon as he finished speaking, the last earth spike suddenly shook and large cracks quickly appeared on it. Soon, a few fresh green buds grew out of the crack. The green buds grew rapidly in the blink of an eye, directly bursting the earth spike from the inside. Seeing this, Shen Ruoshi could not take it anymore. She fainted on top of Jiang Li's body due to her injuries and exhaustion. That was why the Valley Master and the elders felt that Shen Ruoshi had lost. From the beginning, Jiang Li had scattered large amounts of fine seeds in the dust. When Shen Ruoshi condensed the earth spikes, Jiang Li controlled the seeds and sent them inside as well. At the beginning, the density of the earth spike was too high. Even with Jiang Li's would attribute spiritual qi, most seeds would be unable to grow. Except that Jiang Li had discovered a kind of vine plant. This colorful flower vine was also called the earth dragon tendon. It was a terrifying plant that could grow wantonly underground. The root system covered an area of 100 meters underground. Even the rocks could be cracked by the force of its sprouting. Even the mountain could be completely occupied from the outside to the inside. Jiang Li used it to destroy the earth spike. After that, Jiang Li pushed Shen Ruoshi away and stood up to declare his victory. However, the wound on his thigh was too big. There was a visible hole that got pierced. In the shadow behind him, there was even a spot of light where one could see a trickle of blood flowing out. Even his thigh bone was grazed by the earth spike. A large number of cracks appeared, and it was almost broken into two. With such severe injuries, Jiang Li was in so much pain that he nearly lost his footing. It would take an hour to grow the missing piece of flesh. Finally, after the outcome was determined, the few female cultivators from the rejuvenation hall who had been waiting for a long time hurriedly flew into the ring. Before they arrived, they had already struck the two of them with several spell techniques. Treated with the hemostasis spell, added status, hemostasis. Treated with the bone repair spell, added status, bone repair. Treated with the muscle recovery spell, added status, muscle recovery. Chapter 140, Absolute Domain. Several healing spell techniques landed on his body, and naturally, several recovery statuses popped up. Jiang Li had some of these statuses before, while a number of them were new to him. After all, with his physique, it was difficult for him to get injured when he was practicing with his fellow disciples in the Qi refinement realm. This time, such a large piece of flesh was cut off. It was the most severe injury he had suffered since he started his cultivation journey. Looking at the hole, he felt a sense of trepidation. Fortunately, the senior sister of the rejuvenation hall contributed several recovery buffs at the foundation establishment realm. After making the new statuses last an infinite amount of time, Jiang Li roughly calculated that the recovery speed of his injuries had doubled again. There were also effects that targeted hemostasis, bone repair, muscle recovery, and other effects. The effects of these statuses would be more ideal for large wounds. Flesh quickly grew out, filling up the hole in the thigh. The granulation tissues served the purpose of filling and supporting, which was equivalent to the scaffolding on a construction site. These tissues themselves did not have much of a function on their own. Under the support of the growing tissues, the ends of the wound began to produce cells and grow along the thigh's hole. There were also the ruptured tendons, the severed blood vessels, and the severed nerves to heal. These functionary tissues replaced the granulation tissue bit by bit and then connected together at the center of the wound. As the tissues regenerated, the wound was itchy and painful. He did not dare to touch it, afraid that he would affect the healing. Jiang Li could only slowly circulate his wood attribute spiritual qi and gently comb his wound. He could not just stand there and recover. On the spot, he used a wood attribute spell technique to make a wooden wheelchair and sat on it. Then, he watched the other stage's fights while healing his injuries in an innocent manner. Junior brother Jiang Li, can you try to move your toes now? 10 minutes later, senior sister Qi Yu poked Jiang Li's injured leg and asked about his recovery. Jiang Li did as he was told. Although it was still a little difficult, his toes could already move, and his limb senses were slowly recovering from his injuries. However, because the blood vessels in the middle was missing for nearly 10 minutes, the blood supply in the lower limb was disrupted for 10 minutes. After his nerves reconnected, the first thing he felt was a numb and painful feeling, as if he had squatted in a pit for half an hour. He had not experienced such a sensation in a long time. As long as his nerves and meridians recovered smoothly, the recovery of his injuries would only be a matter of time. In order to help Jiang Li recover from his injuries as soon as possible, senior sister Qi Yu and another senior sister used healing techniques on him several times before flying away in the end. This was the benefit of having good social relationships. Other contestants did not receive such treatment. Regarding this, although Jiang Li actually did not need it, he did not reject it for the sake of hiding his secrets to a certain extent. As time slowly passed, the circular scab on Jiang Li's wound became stiff and brittle, and it could fall off at any moment. His weak leg gradually recovered its strength. Jiang Li tried to slowly tighten his muscles. 10% strength, 30% strength, 70% strength, 100% strength. The wooden wheelchair beneath him creaked, as if it would be torn apart by the immense force if it moved slightly. He was slightly happy to find that his injured leg had completely recovered. Even when he tightened his muscles, there was no pain. Moreover, although it had just recovered and had not undergone any rehabilitation, the new flesh and blood had already recovered most of its original strength. It was only slightly weaker than his right leg. As long as he exercised a little, he would be able to recover completely. This sort of thing actually did not make sense, but after some thought, he understood the reason. This was because most of Jiang Li's strength came from the various buffs on the interface. His body cultivation was only at the late stage of body refinement. The current Jiang Li could kill a Jiang Li without any buffs using just one slap. Therefore, even if this injury still affected a portion of his low-level strength, it was not a big deal to the overall situation. Moreover, because his foundation was relatively weak, it was easier to heal him as a late-stage body refinement realm cultivator with the treatment of several foundation establishment cultivators. Jiang Li used his spiritual qi to carefully sense his original wound. The bone that had cracked open earlier had become even tougher and stronger than before. This was probably the effect of Benevolent Travel Temple's Jade Bone Flesh Regeneration Pill. However, this kind of amplification was rather limited, and it was not worth Jiang Li injuring himself by breaking his own bones. "Qing, what do you want?" At this moment, some noisy argument not far from the third ring attracted Jiang Li's attention. "What do I want? I'm only going to continue fighting according to the rules. As for you, Liu Bai, why aren't you guarding your fourth ring properly and stopping me here?" Jiang Li looked over when he heard this. It was his senior brother, Liu Bai, who had an argument with the disciple of the Law Enforcement Hall that he had defeated earlier. The disciple of the Law Enforcement Hall was called Qing Li. Judging from his expression, he probably wanted to go up the arena and challenge Jiang Li, but he was stopped by senior brother Liu Bai. After a battle, the contestants would receive 2 hours of rest. After that, even if their spiritual qi was empty and their injuries had not recovered, they could not reject other people's challenges. This was a rule set from the beginning. It had been 2 hours since he defeated senior sister Shen Ruoshi. Jiang Li, do you really want to challenge an injured Qi refinement realm junior brother? Aren't you afraid of being mocked by your fellow disciples? My fourth ring is still empty. If you have the ability, come and fight me first. After Jiang Li defeated Shen Ruoshi, senior brother Liu Bai woke up from his meditation and successfully took over the fourth ring. After that disciple of the alchemy hall who possessed the heaven and earth spirit fire was defeated in the end, he went to stand guard on the sixth combat ring that Jiang Li was originally on. After all, Jiang Li was not at the Foundation establishment realm. In the end, he still could not participate in the Foundation establishment group competition in the Great Mountain Cultivator competition. Therefore, even if he was ranked first in the sect, they still had to choose 5 Foundation establishment disciples to participate in the cultivation competition. Therefore, the number of arenas naturally increased from 5 to 6. However, senior brother Liu Bai's victory in the battle was not easy either. His black hair had already disappeared, becoming the same refreshing hairstyle as elder he. There were also large burns on his body that had not been completely healed. Coupled with the red beast blood tattoo, it looked a little scary. In other words, the Demon Vanquishing Hall currently occupied 2 stages of the Foundation establishment realm, the 3rd and 4th rings. Their results were already very outstanding. However, Jiang Li's injuries made him look like a pushover in the eyes of the other competitors. Under normal circumstances, even if such injuries could be healed on the spot, the regenerated flesh would undoubtedly be much weaker than before. In this aspect, the more powerful a body cultivator was, the more they were affected. On the other hand, ordinary Qi refinement cultivators would not be troubled by this. In their eyes, Jiang Li was undoubtedly a pure body cultivator. It was the same even if he had displayed pretty good standards in the last battle. Right now, Jiang Li's leg was weak, so his terrifying speed was already crippled. His combat strength had been reduced greatly, and he was still guarding the floating arena that was ranked 3rd. In this way, he would naturally be targeted by others. However, bullying their injured junior brother was indeed a little shameful, so the 6 Foundation establishment disciples who did not manage to obtain a place were still hesitant and did not step forward. They hesitated time and again. In the end, only the law enforcement hall's Jiang Li dared to act against Jiang Li in the name of revenge. Then, Liu Bai, who was currently guarding the 4th ring, could not stand seeing his junior brother being bullied, so he flew out of his ring to stop the other party. This caused Jiang Li to witness the scene from before. HMPH, I don't fancy your 4th ring. Move aside, I'm only challenging him according to the rules of the martial arts competition. If he can't defend the ring, it can only mean that his strength is insufficient. The ring of the Foundation establishment realm is not for a Qi refinement realm disciple to stand in. Jiang Li was right when he said that. However, for someone like him who had lost to a Qi refinement realm disciple earlier, it sounded a little strange. Jiang Li, do you still have any shame? You've completely disgraced all the Foundation establishment disciples. Senior brother Liu Bai's berating caused the other party's expression to change indeterminately. Do you want to break the rules of the martial competition? Move aside, get lost and go back to your 4th ring. The 2 of them flew in the air and were very close to each other. One of them was holding a fist and the other was holding a knife. However, it was obvious that no one dared to act rashly in this situation. Senior brother Liu, let him come over, I'm fine. Jiang Li walked to the edge of the ring and shouted to his senior brother. That Jiang Li was indeed issuing a challenge according to the rules. Jiang Li was not the kind of weakling who needed to be protected like this. Since everyone participated in the martial competition, there was indeed no need to break the rules for such a trivial matter. Junior brother Jiang Li, you. Senior brother Liu Bai was still a little worried, but an elder of the Internal Affairs Hall had already flown over not far away. As he forcefully stopped the challenge process, it was obvious that he did not obtain any support. Under Jiang Li's persuasion, he still flew back to his fourth ring. "Senior brother Jiang Li, please." Jiang Li stretched out his hand and made an inviting gesture to the senior brother of the law enforcement hall before slowly walking back to the center of the ring. The expression of the law enforcement hall's Jiang Li was still not good. Although he was basically taking advantage of a junior, the rules of competition were like this. Furthermore, he still had injuries on his body, but did he complain? Moreover, after the battle with Jiang Li earlier, the group of female cultivators from the Rejuvenation Hall had not given him a good attitude. He did not know what was wrong with the healing spell techniques, but it felt as if they were mixed with chilly water. When they hit him, he was almost tortured to death. "Junior brother, don't worry, I'll hold back." After landing on the arena, Jiang Li kept silent for a long time before he said that. It was unknown if he was trying to show off or if he was truly expressing his concern as a senior brother. It made Jiang Li not know if he should thank him. "No need for that. Senior brother Jiang Li, you lost to me because of carelessness. It's better to be careful this time." Jiang Li reminded him out of kindness. At the same time, he subtly reminded him that this senior brother was the one who had lost earlier, so how could he show mercy? With the low IQ and EQ of the law enforcement hall's Jiang Li, he could basically say goodbye to his future Dao companion in this lifetime. The battle soon began. Jiang Li faced the same opponent again, but as the defending champion this time. The flaming saber chi attacked and was swept up by the flying dragon imprisoning lock. A strangulation was instantly disrupted. Immediately, more flaming saber chi followed. This Jiang Li was certain that Jiang Li's leg had not recovered. He planned to use long-range attacks to directly win. However, after the battle with Shen Ruoshi, Jiang Li suddenly felt that such a battle was boring. With the dragon imprisoning lock in front of him, these flame saber chi could not break through at all. Jiang Li's hands suddenly thrust into the ground, lifting up a heavy stone tablet. Making a standard throwing motion, Jiang Li's entire body suddenly exerted strength. He threw out the huge stone slab that was 3 meters in length and width, and a thickness of 40 centimeters. There was a whistling sound. Jiang Li raised his head and looked up. Then he sneered in disdain, "Throwing stones. This is child's play." The crimson saber slashed at the stone slab in the air. There was a loud explosion. Even the stone slab, which had been specially strengthened for the fights of the Foundation establishment realm, could not withstand the might of this saber and exploded into pieces in midair. The law enforcement disciple Jiang Li smiled disdainfully and was about to say something polite. But suddenly, his expression shifted. He raised his head and stared at the flames that had yet to dissipate. A moment later, 1, 2, and 3 more huge stone slabs continuously tore apart the flames and fell towards him. Without saying anything, Jiang Li actually flipped over the ground. In a short period of time, he threw out more than 20 reinforced stone slabs. It was easy for Jiang Li to break a stone slab, but there were so many that flew over so suddenly. "Damn it, fiery slash, fiery slash, fiery slash." Jiang Li of the Law Enforcement Hall gritted his teeth and released a large amount of spiritual qi. Fire attribute spiritual qi surged into the saber and turned into multiple saber qi that slashed into the air. The saber qi and the stone slabs collided with each other, causing huge crimson sparks to explode nonstop. Countless shattered rocks rained down. Jiang Li only felt that his chest and abdomen, which had yet to recover, began to hurt again. All of a sudden, a large amount of spiritual qi was poured out, causing him to feel dizzy and empty inside. At this moment, crack, a crisp metallic sound could be heard. The expression of the law enforcement hall's Jiang Li changed drastically, but he did not dare to immediately lower his head. He waved his saber again and shattered the last few stone slabs before he gasped and looked down. A pitch-black chain with shackles at the end had already wrapped around his left foot. The pitch-black chain extended forward and connected to Jiang Li, who was standing 100 meters away. The other end of the shackle was on Jiang Li's right leg, while the other end was on his left leg. This meant that he could not escape. Ding, ding, ding. The crimson saber struck the dragon imprisoning lock one after another, causing sparks to fly. However, not a single scratch was left on the pitch-black dragon imprisoning lock. The quality of his saber was not low, but it was on a completely different level compared to the dragon imprisoning lock. Clang! Jiang Li's right leg stepped back, and the dragon imprisoning lock suddenly straightened. Qing Li only felt the air beneath his feet disappear, and he felt an intense weightlessness. His entire body was dragged by the dragon confinement lock, and he crossed over 100 meters of distance before finally stopping in front of Jiang Li. Jiang Li cracked his knuckles as the sounds felt crisp and pleasant to the ear. Within the two range of the dragon imprisoning lock was his absolute domain. After that, there was a series of delightful beatings. Unfortunately, his opponent had only managed to withstand 11 punches before surrendering. Jiang Li could only stop his fists after that. Sorry, I was too heavy-handed. Senior brother Qing Li, please don't take offense. Jiang Li undid the dragon imprisoning lock and helped the bruised and battered Qing Li up from the ground. Under the other party's bitter gaze, he helped him pat the dust on his body and even apologized. After losing twice in a row, Qing Li completely lost his temper. He smiled bitterly and admitted defeat. However, the smile on Jiang Li's face that he could not suppress made him feel that Jiang Li's sorry was not sincere at all. Picking up the long saber, he held his already swollen head and prepared to leave the scene. With his current appearance, he would not have the face to continue fighting. At this moment, boom! A loud rumbling sound came from not far away. The movement that caused even the air to tremble made the Qi Refinement Realm disciples watching the martial arts competition below nearly lose their footing in fear. Be it the disciples who were fighting or the disciples watching the martial arts competition, they all stopped and looked in the direction of the sound. It was the first floating platform. On the first ring, dust had already completely spread out. What was not shocking was that the base of the first floating ring was actually not flat at this time. Instead, it leaned nearly 10 degrees in one direction. At this moment, a sect elder had already arrived. With a wave of his sleeve, a large amount of spiritual qi formed a violent wind and blew away the dust. At this moment, Jiang Li and the others noticed that a mountain had actually appeared on the first combat arena at an unknown time. It was a mountain peak that was more than 20 meters tall and looked like a fake mountain in the courtyard. On one side of the mountain peak were pavilions, small bridges, and flowing water. They were vivid and lifelike. On the other side of the mountain was the graveyard of an abandoned village. It was covered in scorched earth and withered trees. It was filled with a ghastly aura. What a strange artifact. Was it this thing that caused the entire first floating ring to tilt? Jiang Li suddenly recalled the small mountain that the disciple of the Heaven and Earth Hall was dragging at that time. Wasn't this mountain before him formed from that small mountain? Such might was truly slightly shocking. Jiang Li felt that he was unable to go against it. Wait a minute. It was impossible for the Heaven and Earth Hall disciple to use this thing for no reason. If this thing was used and really crushed someone, how could his opponent survive? This was not an external competition, but an internal sect competition. The sect clearly forbade people from intentionally killing each other. They were all fellow disciples, so it should not be allowed.